Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, an evolutionary biologist gets a job at sea that turns deadly very quickly. So, please listen closely as we explain Black Spots and the Norwegian Float.
A lot of people don't seem to know the difference between an evolutionary biologist and a marine biologist. Sure, there is overlap, but you can't just exchange one for the other. As an evolutionary biologist, I've tried to explain this difference to my family for years. I can sort of understand how they can get it mixed up, but when it gets to working out there, in the real world, there really is no reason why an employer would confuse the two. The terms are not interchangeable. Therefore, I was skeptical when I was first asked to be involved with the Norwegian Float project. The study was to be conducted entirely at sea, with the help of both the Icelandic and Norwegian government. The entire project was government sanctioned, and everything was official and on the books. What wasn't talked about was what the project was actually about. For a time, there was even a website, but the description was so generic that it was impossible to learn what was actually going on. Improving and understanding the life of a quickly changing ecosystem, said an important man in a fancy suit through a YouTube link on the front page. I have a saying: when something is so generic that it can be applied to everything, it doesn't mean anything. Let's take a step back. I'm a biologist, evolutionary biologist specifically. I got everything up to my postdoc from the Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden, Stockholm. I've worked with a variety of colleagues from all over the world. I published a paper with a fellow scientist on environmental impacts of electromagnetism in 2015, which I highly recommend reading. When I was asked to work for the Norwegian Float back in 2017, I'd just come back from a study in Iceland. I think this was what sparked their interest in my particular field of study: adaptation and rapid temperature shifts. My specialty is working with fruit flies and stickleback fish. I had been working in the active volcanic areas of Iceland when our operation was suddenly defunded. To this day, I'm not sure why. I don't think it was a coincidence. This is when I was contacted by Norwegian Float Project, or NF for short. They asked me to be a part of a project located far out at sea. Despite me being an evolutionary biologist, again, not a marine biologist. It was weird, but I needed the work. Our entire Iceland project had been axed overnight, and I was just sitting at the hotel watching my bank account drain. I barely asked any questions. I just brought my sticklebacks and climbed aboard. Science ain't cheap. This is what I knew about NF at that point. The entire operation was set at the northern edge of the Norwegian Sea, just north of Iceland. No less than 4 science vessels were active on site, with daily check-ins from the Coast Guard. We were working in 4 teams, isolated from one another, only communicating through approved daily reports that went through what my boss called a funnel. It was a fancy way of saying all communication between teams was monitored, rewritten, and double-checked. Our vessel, the Heyerdahl, could hold a crew of about 12 people, with plenty of space to run samples. On my first day out there, I still had no idea what was going on. My colleagues, 4 Norwegian men and an Icelandic woman, tried to fill me in. It is hard for a landlubber like me to be out in the middle of the Norwegian Sea like this. The waves can reach so high that you swear you're going to capsize. Nothing feels solid, and it can take days before you reach the point where you can feel the waves in your mind before you feel them in your legs. It dips into freezing temperatures at night, and the power necessary to keep climate control running is ridiculous. I can't imagine someone willingly staying out there for a prolonged period. And yet, I signed up for 4 weeks. That was what was stated in my initial contract. We were assigned to work in pairs. I worked with the Icelandic woman, Selma. She was an actual marine biologist, and was just as surprised to see me there as I was. She had little to no idea what was going either. We had our first mission briefing 36 hours after first stepping foot on the Heyerdahl. We were sitting in this small cafeteria-sized room. Everything there is metal. and if the ship rocks too much, it all starts screeching. A man I'd never seen before had set up a projector, and our crew sat down to listen. Everyone was wearing thick jackets, caps, and gloves, but most of us were still shuddering. The man with the projector wasn't. "Do you know the term island biome?" was the first thing he asked us. Most of us nodded. An island biome is the term for an ecologic system that has been largely separated from other systems for a long period of time. Kind of like the Galapagos Islands, Darwin's finches. We've found an island biome, and we need to study it. We need experts from a wide range of areas, so I imagine things will be a bit confusing as we start. Don't be afraid to air your concerns, but please be aware that we are just as confused as you are. He fired up the projector. The image made it clear. They'd found something over 13,000 feet into the sea. A few weeks earlier, there had been a tectonic shift. The NF project had been a standby government task force between the Norwegian and Icelandic government for years, just in case they needed to put together a team at short notice. They had been expecting something like this to happen eventually. Shortly after the shift, they noticed areas of the ocean being discolored, black, through satellite imagery, looking for new land masses. Shortly afterwards, they found an isolated pocket far beneath the ocean surface. This pocket of the ocean, at about 14,000 feet, has been isolated for millions of years. Now it was released into the ocean. An isolated island biome is suddenly introduced to the Norwegian Sea. The reason for the ocean to turn black in the area was nothing short of microbes. Imagine the number of microbes necessary to color the ocean for several square miles. We were shown a series of images. Thick slabs of goo, almost like oil, slapping against the hull of the Heyerdahl. The man with the projector told us we would be allowed to study this in person, and that samples were already being provided. Further samples would be gathered at the request of the team. The implications of this were unfathomable. What kind of life forms have evolved to survive at those crushing depths? I'm not gonna lie, I was excited to get started. So were my colleagues. We were issued some standard safety equipment and briefed on basic protocols. The project was fairly secret as to avoid potentially damaging traffic. We had to surrender our personal cell phones to two men armed with pistols. That first night, we were given some initial samples. My colleagues were ecstatic, and most of the night we were up throwing around names for new species. At least 13 unknown kinds were identified, just that first night. We were surprised to see that most of the microbes were fungi, as opposed to the expected algae. Mushrooms at the bottom of the sea, who would have known? The first few days was amazing. Our reports were smoothly rolling between our four teams, and we'd identified at least 37 different types of fungi in the waters. By this time, we were getting ready to send down deep-sea cameras and diving teams. We were still pretty excited about the entire event, and even the armed guards didn't seem so frightening to us. They were good guys just trying to do their job, after all. They had no reason to be unpleasant. We all ate together in the cafeteria every day. Lots of salted fish and crisp bread, as per Scandinavian tradition. My favorite guard, Hellman, made amazing mayonnaise and tuna sandwiches for us. At the end of the first week, we were getting some strange reports. Most of the fungus we'd been testing had a mineral in common that we were unable to identify. We tried to extract it, and in a few days, we had 3 grams of a completely unknown metal sitting in our lab. Our boss was beyond excited. The third team had a geologist who was unable to even take a guess at what kind of metal we were looking at. It was almost like a crystalline structure, but more similar to lead. We were promised an expert would look into it in a couple of days. We still had our heads spinning with daily discoveries. We even discovered larger life forms like fish. Still, they were smaller than the nail on your pinky finger, but they were actual complex life forms, completely black, pellet-shaped, and eyeless. These fish, just as the fungus, had large traces of the unknown metal embedded in their scales. Our superiors gave it the name of blameless metal, feilfri in Norwegian, claiming with a shrug that it was as good a name as any. After all, it wasn't the metal's fault that it had surfaced. It was blameless, see? We found it kind of funny. You have to remember, we thought we were standing at the edge of the discovery of a century. We had a pretty bright headspace at the time. After 2 weeks, we were all pretty used to working on the higher doll. We all knew each other by name, and we had strict routines that we followed. The expert had arrived and was working with Team 2, but initial tests were inconclusive. The only thing we knew for sure was that the blameless was a previously undiscovered kind of metal that most of the life forms had evolved to gain nourishment from. Selma and I were working on testing the effects of the fungus environment on my spickleback fish. The other teams were using divers to gain less pressure-damaged samples. There was also a deep-sea camera being set up, but we were having trouble finding relevant data. Every day, the microbes were diluted, and the massive amounts of moving water would start to drift us further and further away from the point of origin. Soon, we were split up into 2 teams with 2 vessels each, those following the microbe migration down the current, and those of us who stayed at the origin site. Selma theorized that a particular set of fungus was formed by how deep the isolation biome stretched, as the fungus closer to the ceiling of the bubble was smaller than the larger fungus that lived deeper down. Essentially, it allowed us to gain a sense of how large the pocket really was. Selma ballparked that it was about 2,000 to 2,500 meters in depth, depending on size variation. Still, the crown of our discovery was, by far, the unidentified metal. At the start of my 4th week, I started to see a troubling change in my spicklebacks. I noticed there were fewer of them, and that the water was growing darker despite having a functioning filter. Their behavior changed. They would start swimming in circular patterns around one of the larger females, who would eat them alive. She grew to be more than 3 times the size of the other spicklebacks, and in 2 days, she was the only living fish left in the tank. The dark color of the aquarium came from rapidly multiplying fungus. A lack of pressure didn't seem to be an issue. I reported this to our superiors and asked to do further testing on how fast this fungus could spread, and whether it was a vast difference when treated with fresh salt or brackish water. Selma agreed that it was important, and she was starting to grow worried. However, it was made clear that our main focus should be the metal. Apparently, Team 2 had found that it was extremely reflective. They had managed to gather enough to make a small cube of it, and the thing reflected so much light that it could damage your eyes during prolonged contact. It could also gain enough heat to start a small fire. It was extremely conductive, far surpassing gold and copper. With this potential game changer at hand, my spicklebacks weren't the focus of the Norwegian government anymore. Selma, on the other hand, was anxious. While she took on the responsibility of doing whatever tests management asked us to, I was free to keep experimenting on the spicklebacks and their reaction to the fungus. One morning, when I got to the lab, week 5, the big spickleback female, dubbed Kruger by my team, was nowhere to be seen. The lid of the small aquarium had been pushed aside, and a black slime trail had been left on the floor. I found Kroger wiggling halfway across the room, straight towards my other spicklebacks in the control tank. We decided enough was enough and killed it. That's when we discovered a few troubling features during the autopsy. Kroger had lost both her eyes, and the bones had deteriorated to a sort of black mush. The entire physiology of the fish was getting replaced by something jelly-like. The concentration of the metal was higher, especially in the brain. Selma flagged in her report that we needed to take increased security measures, and that the fungus could be dangerous when inhaled. Management didn't listen, but we started wearing gas masks from that point on. Many of my colleagues followed suit voluntarily. This was only the start of our troubles. The diving teams reported getting burns, as if stung by jellyfish, straight through their diving suits. We were told about long, lightning-like burns on their torsos, arms, and thighs. One of them had apparently been so harshly burned that they had gone into anaphylactic shock. They had to be immediately returned to the surface, risking decompression sickness. We were not told about this in any of the reports, but by the guards who we'd gotten to know by now. Hellman was just as worried as we were. But everything went to shit when, by week 6, it started raining. It was a cold morning in early April when the rains came. It was immediately obvious that something wasn't right. The water drops were thick and almost the size of golf balls. Some of them fell so hard and fast that there were cracks in the glass of the main bridge. We were ordered inside, but Selma managed to get a few samples. The management was duct taping towels to the glass, trying to cover it up. It was the same fungus that we'd studied, but slightly refined. The fungus had tagged along the evaporating ocean water and become a part of the rain formation cycle. This happens to some degree in nature all the time, but I'd never seen anything like it. It was far too aggressive. The clouds were solid black. Drops weren't just falling, they were dripping, forming a pour-like texture on the black clouds. The sky looked like a big hairy creature, with drops falling from hair-like tendrils. For a moment, it felt like the end of the world. Nothing has ever made me felt so small, so insignificant. The guards were having trouble getting their uniforms off. The droplets were so thick, quickly hardened, turning it into a slime-like substance. Niels, one of my colleagues, were starting to complain about a stinging, salt-like sensation in his eyes. Thinking back on what happened to Kruger, I was getting a bad feeling. It all went to hell quickly. Niels locked himself in the bathroom, vomiting. One of the guards, Hellman, stripped naked and started scratching his skin with an army knife. Selma and I tried to get into our safety equipment, but there was no time. 3 of our colleagues got there first, and one of the guards started waving his pistol around. Things were about to go bad, so we just stepped out. We wrapped ourselves in ponchos and hurried up on deck. The drops were so big that I was struck to the ground. Selma helped me up, a bit stepped away as she saw my hands covered in black. Trying to walk on the upper decks was like sliding back and forth in wet mud. We also noticed the boat wasn't rocking as much as usual. The ocean surface had turned a bit more solid. We got to the main bridge, but were locked out. They refused to let us in, and when we were being insistent, they started threatening us. They assured us they would use force to keep us out if necessary. We abandoned the idea and ran to the rescue boats, pulled the plastic tarp over us, and tried to wait it all out. After a few hours, the clouds covered the sky. It was barely 11 a.m., and it was completely black outside. Selma and I stayed quiet, hearing the thick smatter of droplets on the plastic tarp. We could hear screams coming from the main deck. Selma peeked out at one point, but quickly looked away. "There's something in the water," she whispered. I peeked out, but could only catch a glimpse before Selma pulled me away. There were thousands of them. Endless fairy lights, just beneath the mucus surface of the ocean. I'm sure it was the reflective metal reacting to our warning lights, bouncing off of thousands of life forms. By 1 p.m., we heard gunshots. We hid under the tarp, but could hear the scene playing out. Someone was running out on the main deck, followed by at least 6 other people. While Selma was looking away, I peeked out. I could see Hellman standing at the front of the main deck. He was naked and bleeding, holding a gun out towards 5 of our colleagues. In the front was Niels. His face turned completely black. I couldn't see his eyes. "Stay back!" Hellman screamed. "Get back inside!" They didn't stay back. Instead, they reached for him, groaning. "Kill me!" they begged. "Eat me!" As they grabbed Hellman, he started firing blindly. I covered my head and ears, just waiting for it all to be over. For at least half an hour, there were guttural screams, people begging, pleading, screaming for Hellman to kill them and eat them. People crying, screaming, and trying to force themselves into his mouth. What worries me is what I heard at the end, before things went quiet. They were no longer begging and crying. They were thanking him, then nothing. A few hours passed. We could hear helicopters, and the drops stopped falling on our tarp. You have no idea how loud a helicopter really is until you're standing right below one. They're deafening. Selma and I were given blindfolds and carried out to a nearby Coast Guard boat. People were screaming in Icelandic, but I could barely hear it over the helicopters. As we were getting further and further away from the site, I slowly realized that Selma and I had been separated. I'd had my blindfold on for close to 8 hours when I was pushed into a decontamination room. My clothes were cut off with scissors, and I was sprayed with freezing water and antiseptics. I could have sworn it was pure chlorine. They shaved my head. They took blood tests, and I was forced to blow through some kind of a tube, like a sobriety test. They also tapped my teeth with some sort of tiny hammer. I was in quarantine for a week. It wasn't bad, just a small room and no human contact. No internet, but pretty much anything I could ask for otherwise. I spent that week reading and writing down my thoughts. Pretty much everything I wrote down was confiscated by the end of the week, and I was forced to sign an agreement not to talk about it. I'm thinking, to hell with it. What the hell is Iceland going to do about it? I've been completely disconnected from the Norwegian float project since, but it is still up and running. I've read reports about black spots appearing along the ocean current, and I suspect the fungus is migrating. The northern coast of Iceland was briefly evacuated following the resurgence of one of these black spots, but they claimed it was for seismologic reasons. Bullshit. Didn't see any papers mentioning the apparent mass suicide. That's why I'm on Reddit. This is where I get the real information. I've seen videos of people freaking out the same way the crew of the Heyerdahl did, begging to be killed and eaten. This seems to be a recurring pattern, and I've seen it triggered in all manner of strange ways. The weirdest thing I've seen was some sort of video game triggering the same effect in people. Also, one of my old colleagues seems to have worked on something that seems eerily familiar to the blameless metal we found. Small world, isn't it? It's the same person I worked on my article about electromagnetism back in 2015. I think the NF project has tried to contain this thing. There was a period when there were barely any black spots at all during most of 2018 to 2019. But all of a sudden, they just started popping up out of nowhere. They're still out there. You can find them on Google Maps even. See for yourself. The biggest I've seen is at 54.7167347723166 minus 22.2749 413-313-1312. It wasn't just Brexit that screwed with commercial fishing in the UK. Let's leave it at that. It started off the coast of Norway and Iceland, but there are black spots appearing as far away as Ireland and the UK. By my predictions and following the migration patterns, the next few spots will start to appear outside the coast of Newfoundland and the Gulf of St. Lawrence in late 2021. Just as an example, I'll show you a satellite image I found from last September. Please keep in mind that this was just south of the coast of Greenland. It is not far away from the US mainland by now. Image. I don't even want to think about what the Kroger human will look like, but from my calculations it could be a monstrosity as tall as 20 feet. That's just a rough estimate based on the little time I had to study these things. Look for the black spots, look for the symptoms. They make you beg and squirm. They make you want to be eaten.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man's aunt passes away and leave him items that's wanted by more than just collectors. So, what item is passed down in your family? Because mine's is the Soundless Lady.
My Aunt Rachel practically raised me. After a lengthy battle with a terminal illness, she passed last year, leaving what little she had left after the hospital bills were paid. I was to take care of her cockatiel parrot, Tugboat, and her collection of 50s cartoon-themed collective plates. Basically, the only two items that couldn't be easily sold at an auction. If you saw the plates, you'd see why. Downright creepy things. One in particular, a plate portraying a young cartoon girl feeding apples to a giant frog. It's like the whole thing was made by two different people. The girl looked positively Disney, while the frog was more, uncomfortably realistic. It was such an odd item that there had to be a collector looking for it somewhere. I was sure of it. Yet for weeks, I couldn't find anyone even remotely interested. I posted pictures of the plate on pretty much every social media account I had, along with a few auction sites. But there were no takers. There were no markings or stamps indicating year or brand, unlike the other plates. And I was starting to think it was custom made. I couldn't stand looking at it. So I put it in a box in the garage. The others went up on my kitchen wall. My aunt would have wanted it that way. I live in a house not too far from the lake, on the outskirts of a small Minnesota town. There are a few houses in the nearby area, but I couldn't even hit the closest neighbor's yard with a rock if I tried. There's only a single streetlight that works outside, and that thing is flimsier than our summer weather. I rarely have any visitors, as this place can be a bit too out of the way even for my friends to come by. I inherited this place from my mom, who passed away when I was younger. I'm one of the lucky house owners of my generation, but at what cost? My aunt's bird tugboat fit right in. It was easy for me to fix him a big cage in one of the back rooms. When you're living on your own in a place like this, you got more space than you know what to do with. My aunt's funeral was simple. She'd insisted she paid for it herself, so it had to be as basic and cheap as could be. She hated the thought of ever being a burden, and she practically begged me to take care of Tugboat. You don't say no to that. You just don't. Besides, that bird was damn near the only thing that kept me sane through the COVID pandemic. Having lived in an empty house, you learn to identify most sounds around the property. The hum of the fuse box, the buzzing kitchen lights, the noise from the fridge against the backdrop of a TV that's been on way too long without anyone watching. This was the only reason I ever really took notice, that one night when this all started. I was turning on my electric toothbrush one night, only to notice it was completely silent. The motor was running, I felt the vibrations, and I saw it spin, but there was no sound. Not a peep. Yet, I could still hear the TV in the other room just fine. Over the next few days, there were several of these odd instances. Once, the egg timer went off but didn't make a sound, causing me to overboil my breakfast. I thought the ventilation was broken once, but it turned out to have just gone quiet. Hell, at one point I dropped one of my aunt's collective plates. It shattered against the ceramic tiles, yet didn't make any noise. I was starting to think I was going deaf, but the 2 doctors I spoke to confirmed my hearing was just fine. Still, the mental image of seeing that falling plate and expecting a loud crash, only for it to remain silent, there was something eerie to it. A friend of mine, Patrick, works for the sheriff's department. We usually had lunch once a week to catch up, but that tradition teetered off during the pandemic. This time, I met him at the supermarket, but barely even noticed him. I had been having trouble sleeping and getting to work on time, as my alarm clock sometimes stayed silent for no apparent reason. My boss wasn't too happy, so I had to start using a vibration alarm. Patrick elbow bumped me by the fruit aisle, snapping me out of my thoughts. "Hey there," he said, grabbing a handful of oranges. "You doing okay?" "Yeah, sorry, I didn't see you there." "These are crazy times," he said. "I heard about Rachel. I'm sorry I couldn't make the funeral." "That's okay," I nodded. She never was much for men in uniform. Patrick laughed. We went our separate ways and finished our shopping, only to meet in the parking lot outside. We'd managed to park next to each other without even realizing it. He leaned against the hood of his car. "Hey, have you seen any strangers around? After this year, you all seem like strangers." "You know what I mean," he chuckled. "Strangers, passers-by." "No, sorry, I don't get out much. Some of your neighbors have had problems. Be careful." "Problems?" He looked at me like a deer in headlights. "You don't know?" Apparently, there'd been reports of a thief. First, they thought it was raccoons, as someone had gone through the trash cans. But raccoons don't try to pick locks. They also don't leave food behind, or human-sized handprints on the windows. Some people had reported seeing a woman with tangled hair roam about, but the police hadn't managed to find her. This is what made me start looking more closely at my own property. I had noticed the garbage can lid gone missing, but I hadn't given it much thought. Also, I could have sworn there were handprints on my car one dewy morning. I tried to tell myself that it was all paranoia, but after what Patrick said, it seemed that everything was a clue, or a warning. In my mind, the strange woman was lurking behind every corner. I tried to put it out of my mind. One night, as I heard Tugboat sing his interpretation of Earth, Wind and Fire's September, I took an extra long shower. As I was scrubbing my hair clean, my head went quiet. I could feel the water touching my skin, but it made no sound. Through the door, I could still hear the bird sing his heart out. You'd be surprised how cold, warm water can feel when you've got ice in your veins. I rinsed off most of the shampoo and stepped out. There's a small frosted glass window in my bathroom. The silhouette of a pale face was pressed against it. I screamed, but no sound came out. Tugboat kept singing in the other room, unaware. I grabbed my robe and ran into the kitchen to call Patrick, but I couldn't hear anyone pick up on the other end of the line. I couldn't hear my own words when I spoke. And there, just outside the kitchen window, was the silhouette of an intruder trying to find their way in. A pair of unevenly sized eyes stared at me, slightly too far apart. As our eyes met, she bolted, probably heading for the back door. I picked up my keychain. Tugboat stopped singing from the other room, as he sensed something was wrong. As my hearing returned, I could hear the comforting sound of sharp metal from my kitchen knife as I pulled it from a drawer. My pulse was running away from me. It is one thing to think of a home invasion, but to live it violates every thought of privacy and safety you have. It was turning real fast. There was a large sliding glass door leading out to the backyard, and I figured if there ever came an intruder, it'd be through there. The same room where Tugboat chirped away, but now he'd gone quiet. I ran in there, still fresh out of the shower, my knife held in a cramped, forced grip. I almost convinced myself that I was ready to use it. There she was, just outside the door, pale, with unkempt hair, eyes of different sizes, slightly too far apart, dressed in what looked like a hospital gown. She was malnourished and frail, but something told me she had the strength of a madwoman. Her eyes darted back and forth, searching for something. As they landed on me, she opened her wide mouth to scream. Not a sound came out. As her mouth grew to an unnatural size, I could feel vibrations in the air, like standing next to a concert loudspeaker. The sliding glass door shattered, the shards fanning out towards me. The knife in my hand started shaking, but I managed to hold it. She stepped inside, her bare feet smearing ribbons of blood on the hardwood floor. She was coming for me, a constant vibration from an unnatural scream, tearing through my body. I had to try to call for help, and sprinted back into the kitchen. The light bulbs burst overhead, turning the room black. Still, not a single noise. A stray light from the streets outside made its way through the kitchen window, making the room drip with long, pale shadows. My aunt's collective plates rattled on the wall. Glasses along the kitchen sink were cracking and breaking. Empty bottles spilled onto the floor. Cabinet doors shaking back and forth, opening seemingly at random. An old recipe book fell from a countertop, the pages flicking back and forth. I pressed myself against the kitchen window, fumbling to get it open. She'd cornered me. Her mouth was wide open in that impossible scream, her body vibrating with machine-like intensity. The tangled hair twisting and stretching, as if thrown about in a storm of its own. Her uneven eyes searched for me, twitching like insects. And still, she didn't make a single sound. There were no humming fans, no buzzing electricity, only a soft breeze outside the window. I couldn't even hear my heartbeat. I managed to stumble out of the kitchen window, stepping onto the sharp gravel path. I still held onto my knife like a comfort blanket. I didn't even bother to see if she followed me, I just ran. There was no time to get in the car. I ran into the woods, following a trail that would lead me to my neighbor. Soon, the rhythmic beat of my feet went quiet, my breath too. I tried to scream for help, but the sound was swallowed. She was right behind me. Long nails reached for me, fingertips touching the edge of my robe. And all around me, nothing but tranquil nature, unbothered by my terror. I was knocked to the ground, scraping my legs against the undergrowth. I slashed with my knife, trying to fight her, as a dainty hand picked up my keys from the side pocket of my robe. I rolled away, only to see the mess of tangled hair walk away. Her uneven eyes gave me a last look as she turned her back to me. She looked right through me without a care in the world. I got to my neighbor. My dirty feet muddied their floor, and by the time the police came, it felt like a waking nightmare. I made my statement, showered for the second time that night, and slept at a nearby motel as the police cleared my house. The next day, I assessed the damage. The house had been searched thoroughly, but nothing was stolen. Not too much was broken either. Seems she was looking for something specific, not trying to steal any valuables. The police were just as dumbfounded as I was, and I didn't report anything stolen. My insurance company would need an explanation. It was hard to explain why it looked like the house had been hit by a tornado from the inside without sounding insane. All the collective plates laid shattered on the floor. Poor Tugboat was so traumatized, he's since stopped singing. Going through the damages was heartbreaking. but it made me take notice of something peculiar. The garage had been searched as well. It was pretty much fine though, at least compared to the house. Among my boxes, I noticed a single item missing. The creepy plate I'd put aside for my aunt. The only one I didn't want in the house. The one with the young cartoon girl feeding the giant frog. It was gone. I guess I found the single collector who wanted it.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man gets dumped by his girlfriend, decides it's time to start over, when things start to get increasingly crazier. So, they'll always have enough, because everyone gets a mask.
Hey, I don't post online often, but I've been experiencing something weird and wanted to hear if anyone else has experienced something similar, or if you have any advice. Or maybe I just want someone to listen, I don't know anymore. This entire situation is just out of control. I've turned out all the lights and locked the door, so I don't think anyone knows I'm here. Maybe the patrolman. It's just me and that mask for now. At the beginning of the 2020 pandemic, I was suddenly dumped by my girlfriend of 4 years, Sherry. She was going to study at a university abroad, and instead of even having a conversation with me about it, she just decided to end it. Hell, I would have moved to Stockholm right along with her, even if I don't know a word of Swedish. But here we are. A few weeks prior, I had been considering a job opportunity in a nearby town, and this breakup was the final straw. I took the offer, packed up my things, and tried to look forward. You know, even when my heart was trying to pull me back. My new apartment wasn't anything amazing, but way better than expected. A bedroom, a living room, a surprisingly spacious kitchen, and a bathroom with a large tub. I couldn't complain, and the rent was dirt cheap. I got the place recommended through a work colleague who had just moved out of there, and they had nothing but good things to say. Normal neighborhood, and if I ever needed it, there was also a daycare just across the street. Not that I have any kids yet. Maybe someday I make it through the night. Not with Sherry, though. She had her chance. Sorry, I'm having a hard time concentrating. I keep hearing these noises in the stairwell. They're knocking on all the doors. So anyway, I moved in at the beginning of February 2020. Everything seemed fine. As a warehouse and logistics manager, I'm constantly putting out fires. But compared to my last job, this was a cakewalk. Living alone, the paycheck went straight to my pocket. I gotta admit, I splurged a bit. New TV, new furniture, fancy new bed. This place shaped up real nice, real fast. Maybe that's why I'm having a hard time letting go of it. I met the neighbors in passing every now and then. Nothing formal, but they seemed nice. The apartment building has 4 floors with 2 apartments each, and I'm on the top one. There are a whole bunch of similar buildings around here, at least 8. There's a large elevator that can take me straight up to my door. The walls are modern and mostly soundproof, so the only time I would hear my neighbors were during their 4th of July celebration. They were nice enough to put up a notice about it on the board downstairs, though. All kinds of people live here, but mostly young adults and middle-aged couples. There are 2 families on the bottom floor that seem to be best friends, having their kids play. Sometimes even leaving the front doors open for them to run from one apartment to the other. I thought the kids would get on my nerves, but it's nice to see some happy faces when you get home from work. Alright, so about the masks. Yeah, I'm getting there. It was the beginning of September 2020. The rain was getting bad and people were going back into lockdown after the summer. We were all bracing for a second wave of the virus. One day when I got back from work, there was a package outside my door. There was a similar package outside my neighbor's door. I was curious and walked down a flight of stairs, only to see the same kind of package outside every door there as well. I figured it was a commercial stunt, so I just picked up my package and opened it then and there it was. It wasn't just some ordinary, cheap plastic mask. This thing had a built-in air filter and was made with some kind of rubbery plaster, almost half an inch thick. It could cover my face and half of my scalp. It was large enough that there was a little mechanism that you could hook behind your ears, built in, but it was a bit loose. The thing probably cost upwards of $100 to make. Probably weighs around 2, maybe 3 pounds. The problem was the face. This mask was weird. It has the expression of someone just mindlessly gazing into nothingness. Mouth half open, slack-jawed, tired eyes. A piece of white felt behind the eyes, so you can't see what the wearer's looking at. It has a sterile white color, with a thin black lining around the inner edges of the eyes. Kinda like an eyeliner. There was no note, no explanation, no packing, no sender, nothing. Someone hand-delivered them. I was about to go inside when my neighbors stepped out of the elevator. We had a small chat and wished each other well. Then they noticed the package outside their door. Some kind of gift, the husband asked. Do you know who? No idea? I shrugged, holding up my mask. But they don't look cheap. I wonder if we got two. The masks were slightly different sizes, but had the same face and color as mine. We laughed it off, wished each other a good evening, and locked our front doors. Social distancing. I don't know if I should have just tossed the damn thing then, or if I should have held onto it tighter. I didn't even think about that mask for at least a week, until I woke up late one night. It was about 3 a.m, and something was going on at the daycare across the street. 3 police cars, all with flashing lights, pulled up at the same time. They turned off their sirens, but I was up and staring out the window in a heartbeat. 2 officers entered the building with their guns drawn. There was a lot of shouting, but it died down fast. About 10 minutes later, an ambulance arrived. No sirens, just flashing lights. Police tape was put up. The next day, there was a short article in the local paper. There'd been a murder. A young man who lived in the area was on his way home when he was reportedly followed. He called the emergency number and tried to take shelter in the local daycare, but police didn't get there fast enough. He'd been stabbed to death while the emergency operator was still on the line. They couldn't say for sure if the assailant had been a man or a woman, only that they had been wearing an odd white mask with a peculiar expression. The police were all over the case. They checked with every single neighbor in the area. I was one of the last ones they interviewed, seeing as I lived on the top floor. I told them what little I could, and they seemed ready to let me go. That's when I showed them the mask. I'd hidden it away in a storage closet and hadn't thought about it in a while. Same as the others, they said. Did you see who delivered it? Not a clue, I said. Everyone got one. No. Weird phone calls, notes, friend requests? Of course, there was nothing. The masks had shown up out of nowhere. The hunt for the masked murderer was on. It wasn't exactly nationwide news, but we got our fair share of reporters looking into it. Apparently, the victim had a mask of their own, but it was found broken. The police looked into everyone who owned one of those masks, but it was soon made clear that the murderer could have been just about anyone in town. There was no way to tell where the masks came from, or where they'd been made. Someone could be handing them out just to throw the police off their trail. In the months leading up to Christmas, I started seeing those masks around town. People started wearing them to protect themselves from the pandemic at first. They're surprisingly comfortable. But after a while, it became a social thing. You could spot a neighbor across the street and wave at them, all with a little sense of anonymity. When you wore that mask, you were just a curious nobody from the neighborhood. You were one of the crew. Anonymous, yet belonging. Hell, I wore it one time when I went grocery shopping instead of my ordinary face mask. I gotta say, the weird white mask was way more comfortable, except for the faulty ear strap. That, and people seemed friendlier. Well, some people. The ones with masks. Soon, I started seeing the masks at night. People would dress in bulky clothes and meet up with other masks outside, completely silent. They'd leave each other notes on the board on the bottom floor. A lot. The messages were very open and inappropriate. Things like couples inviting people to their bedrooms, or anonymous and hateful messages about people outside the neighborhood. If the masked killer could get away with murder, after all, they could all get away with calling out a loud neighbor or asking for casual sex. But people can normalize everything. We adapted to the pandemic, so we figured we could adapt to this too. The police asked people to stop wearing the masks, and everyone agreed to do so. Then they wore it anyway. There wasn't much pushback, so I figure at least a few of the officers had masks themselves. But not everything was sinister. I remember one time when a masked woman took to the streets to play her violin. It was just around the first snowfall, and the entire neighborhood were looking out their windows. Behind every pane of glass was a pale face staring at her. I had my own mask on. It felt weird not to have it. We couldn't call the police or turn anyone in just for the mask. I mean, were we turning in a murderer or a violinist? Sherry would have hated it. She always hated mannequins, dolls, masks, all that stuff. There was something about faces frozen in time that freaked her out. But things were going downhill, fast. Over the course of a few weeks after Christmas, there were 2 muggings, 1 assault, and 1 attempted murder. All assailants were described as wearing masks. Funny how I stopped noticing the flashing lights and sirens. I guess we really can adapt to anything. In early January 2021, the masks stepped it up. The messages were getting cryptic. Meetings at midnight. Sometimes there was gunfire or screams. One apartment building had a small fire started in the kitchen. Then they started going door to door in my apartment building. There were usually 4 of them. 2 couples, early 50s. They don't say anything, they just knock on your door and wait. They're making sure everyone are still wearing their masks. If you don't open the door wearing your mask, I got the feeling they'd do something bad. I'm pretty sure they have concealed holsters. They're pretty open about it. Yes, I answer the door every time they knock. Yes, I wore the mask. No, the strap thing behind the ears still wasn't sitting right. The nightly gatherings became more frequent. Sometimes they'd all go somewhere. Sometimes they'd just disperse. This one time the police came and everyone just ran back into their buildings. The police went door to door to ask if we still had our masks. Of course I lied and told them no. No one was arrested. All around town, petty crime was on the rise. Break-ins, vandalism, car theft. But it was getting a bit more serious. Some masks were seen walking around with handguns and knives. One time, there were 3 masks with Molotov cocktails. There was another attempted murder as well, a young woman being shot at close range 3 times. She ended up in a coma. There's also singing. Mostly at night, but sometimes I hear it when I just walk around town. A cashier whistling a certain tune, a ringtone from a phone in the crowd. People all around town started embracing the idea of living double lives. Hell, sometimes they don't even try to hide it. I once saw a mask and uniform handing out parking tickets in broad daylight. Fast forward to 3 nights ago. I've been getting ready to leave town. I've talked to my brother about crashing on his couch, and I've been packing up the essentials. Then someone knocked on my door. The patrolman, I figured, and put on my mask. But it wasn't the patrolman. Outside my door in the unlit hallway was a skinny man, towering above me. Tall, elongated. He was wearing a hoodie, a pair of pale old blue jeans, and I can't remember his feet. I don't know if he even had any. He was wearing one of the masks, but I was floored by just how tall he was. He would have to crouch to even fit through the doorway. He tensed up to move, and I stepped back. Maybe he was about to leave, I don't know. I was too surprised. My damn mask came off. The strap behind my left ear finally snapped. My mask fell off, and the tall man stared at my naked face. Then he did something I've never seen before. His mask moved. It went from a mindless, open-mouthed face to a joyful one. A big, grinning smile, cheeks that puff up. White lips revealing a white inner mouth. White tongue, white teeth, white throat. It wasn't a mask. I ran to my bathroom, fumbling for my phone. I was just about to slam the door shut when I noticed a long arm holding it open. He was reaching over me, completely silent. That big grin came closer as he searched my face. I just held my breath, looking for an opportunity to run. He was so quiet, so quick. It was like watching a twitching bug. I didn't feel his breath. Then he gave me a new mask, held it up to me with 2 long fingers, like leather chopsticks. It looked just like my old one, but it was brand new. The straps were reinforced. I took the mask, spat out a reflexive thank you, and saw the tall man back out of the room, still wearing that big grin. Looked like a caricature of a person backing away from a frightened animal. I felt like a deer in headlights. It was all so quiet. I slept in my bathtub that night with a locked door. I held the mask close all night long and dreamt of faces coming out of the bathroom tiles. white faces grinning. Now, I'm not sure things can get worse. That's why I'm not sure if I should still run or not. The patrolmen are coming tonight, I just know it. But I don't know if it is a good idea for me to answer the door. I don't want to put on the mask again, it feels irreversible. Maybe my old mask was faulty. Maybe this all affects us in a greater way than just giving us a sense of anonymity. Maybe this tall man is something else. They call him the handsome man on the board downstairs. Almost every note is about him. They thank him, they bless him. Handsome man, handsome man, handsome man. Hell, I heard it sung in the stairwell. I have my bags packed, but I'm getting cold feet. I don't know what would happen if I stayed longer. Then again, with a mask like this, I could do amazing things, right? Looking through the eyes of that mask, I see freedom. Unyielding, unadulterated freedom. I don't hate it, would you? Just saying, maybe there's a good reason why people adore that thing. Sherry's returning home over the summer. It's just the next town over. That bitch has it coming.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man plays a game that he regrets he ever downloaded. So, by any means necessary, don't play Hatchet Man Cove.
At first, I wrote this entire post as a way to get people to uninstall and remove the game Hatchet Man Cove from their Steam accounts, but I soon realized pretty much no one has ever played it. But if you by any chance happen to own a copy, please, I urge you, remove it. Uninstall and forget it. Don't look back. Don't touch it ever again. I'll tell you why. A friend of mine bought a 3-pack of Hatchet Man Cove back in 2009. It was a multiplayer game where 3 people are paired up against a single strong player on the opposite team. Kind of like an early Dead by Daylight game. This game might very well be a spiritual predecessor. The similarities between those games are pretty eerie. I'm sure at least one person on the Dead by Daylight team has a Steam copy of Hatchet Man Cove, and that kind of worries me. See, Hatchet Man Cove was this game where you played in cycles, kind of like a red light, green light game. 3 people play as survivors from a ship that crashed into the cove, and a 4th player gets to play as the killer. The killer wasn't necessarily some slasher with an axe. It could be a vengeful angel, a grim reaper, or several other kinds of killer. At least that was the original plan. So the game would alter between having bright lights all over the map going on and off. While they were on, the killer would notice any kind of movement with a pane. When the lights were off, survivors could move any way they want as long as they didn't draw too much attention. They could set up traps to delay the killer or sabotage the lights to get more time. The killer, on the other hand, was to grab the survivors and drown them in a well at the center of the map. Once a survivor was grabbed, the other survivors are given a choice to either try and intercept the killer using traps or use the time to gain an advantage. The problem was that Hatchet Man Cove didn't sell very well. The developers had some legal trouble with their publisher, who were pissed about the developers backing out of an exclusive deal with OnLive. Check it, it's on Wikipedia. There was no promotion on Steam or anywhere else, as the publishers didn't want it released on another platform. They didn't want it released at all for another 6 months until the game had the proper infrastructure. The devs screwed up and published it on Steam anyway, and the whole thing was a mess. Still, during the months that it was active, there was a fairly regular player base. My friends and I played it pretty much every day for about a month. I mained Sturgis as a survivor, the Norwegian fisherman who could lure the killer using his fishing rod. As a killer, there were only 2 options at the time: the Hatchetman and the Blameless. I preferred to play the Hatchetman. He was straightforward. You got a hatchet, could destroy shelters, and had a certain resistance to traps. The Blameless, she was just weird. They never managed to balance her right. The Blameless was an old woman. She was slow, but she floated around the map and avoided all ground-based traps. She always had this warm smile, and her passive ability was just the weirdest. If she was far away, she would look like a random ally on your team. Only when she got closer would she reveal that sinister, smiling face. Hatchet Man was just a murderer, but the Blameless was downright creepy. But the game didn't get any updates because of the legal battle. No updates, no new survivors, no killers, nothing. Instead, the game went silent. We stopped playing, and a few months later, the game was unceremoniously unlisted and removed from the Steam store, without as much as an apology. I uninstalled Hatchet Man Cove and didn't think about it for years. Just one of those games that rest in the back catalog. I forgot I even had it. But this is where things get weird. Last December, I was gifted the new Harvest Moon game as a Christmas present, and some primal part of my reptile brain clicked back in on Hatchet Man Cove. The friends I used to play with had moved on with their lives, but the game still had a Steam community page. I checked the store page, and it was empty. The game couldn't be found on Google either. The game was completely hidden. If you don't actually have it in your library, you won't find it without a direct link. That in itself is kind of weird. Most abandoned games can still be Googled. But Hatchet Man Cove still had a very, very active community. There were plenty of discussions on the forums, but they didn't make any sense. Their speech was almost garbled. I'm sure whatever they discussed made sense to them, but to an outsider, it seemed like nonsense. A few examples. Topic. How much GW to finish no min? I want to finish no min, I don't know yet. Just don't GW then. Get your shit together. You'll never go min if you don't GW, just commit. The discussion forum is just a mess. The example above was the most legible thing I could find, and I still have no idea what it says. So I started checking out the community content like videos and screenshots. The way the community played the game was completely different from when I played. Pretty much no one played Hatchetman anymore. The killer seemed limited to the blameless. Not a single screenshot of the Hatchetman, just the blameless. But the weirdest thing was how players interacted with the killer. Instead of hiding, they come running up to her. They run up to her with their microphones on, screaming at her. Screaming, begging, pleading for her to kill them. Not with funny voices or anything, no. There were people crying in chat. Videos marked with GW, and various dates littered the community page, each with people crying and screaming and begging to die. The volume maxed out immediately, and most of the time, all voices were nothing but a crackling mess that could easily blow out your speakers. I couldn't stop watching. I'd never seen anything like it, not even back in the days when I was still playing. That wasn't the way you played the game. No one was hiding or looking for objectives. I'd see players using my old main Sturgis and just rush the blameless as soon as the match started. Seeing the 3D model of the old bearded man running up to the blameless, pleading to die, that was uncomfortable. I made the mistake of posting my own question on the discussion forum. I was just too curious. You have to remember, at this point, this was still just a weird blip in my Steam library. I made my own topic and just asked, what the hell happened to the game? I got no responses in a week. Nothing. After that, things have gotten weird. Real weird. It started with CSGO. One night, a teammate came on and just started screaming. No big deal at first, just another troll, but he was screaming at me, specifically. Screaming at me, begging me to shoot him. There was crime. He was desperate, asking me to please team kill him. He offered to send me money, trade rare skins, whatever I wanted. He got kicked before I even knew what to say. 2 games later, the same guy joins my team with a different username and clan tag. He keeps screaming, crying, and begging. My teammates laughed, but I was getting uncomfortable. I stopped playing. Hearing a grown man barely being able to breathe between sobs is just too much. That wasn't a prank, that was desperation. But it didn't stop there. From that point on, in several games, people started joining and begging me to kill them. It could be by text, in Steam, chat, by voice, whatever they could. Once in Fall Guys, there were 2 people with the usernames Kill Me and Kill Me Too. How? You can't even pick your own username in Fall Guys. They just stood there, waiting for me to push them over the edge. These colorful little blob people just made my stomach crawl, because I knew that whoever controlled them were sitting there, screaming in a complete panic behind the screen. It just kept going. In Red Dead Redemption 2, I used to have the setting to hear and be heard by everyone enabled, but I had to stop. Naked users came running at me while I was camping out at Strawberry, and I turned off all audio as soon as I saw them. I was shaking as I realized the mute setting didn't work, and I force closed my game. I swear for a few seconds after the executable had closed, I could still hear them. I threw my headphones across the room and walked away from the computer, just holding my head and quivering. I didn't know what to do. I could barely be at my computer. I went back to the Hatchetman Cove Steam forums and just started reporting people. I also reported all videos to YouTube, and I just flagged everything. I know I abused the report system, but things were getting out of hand. I was being harassed. So they took it down. Not just the forums or the videos, but everything. The entire Steam page. Gone, including the community page. I could still see the name Hatchetman Cove in my library at that point, but nothing showed up when I clicked it. YouTube and Steam probably didn't care much and didn't bother to do a review my reports. It was easier to just pull the plug. And for a while that did the trick. I actually got back on CSGO. Then it got worse than ever. Random people started joining our Discord server, just screaming into our ears. No matter how many times we banned them or muted them, they just kept coming back. My friends noticed that as long as I was offline, their voices stayed away. so my server figured I was playing a prank or something. At first they thought it was kind of funny, but the more it happened, the more they were getting frustrated. Some were getting scared and sent me private messages asking me to please, as friends, stop. Today I'm permabanned. I can't even log back onto Discord without getting messages from random accounts begging me to come online and kill them. It has gotten to the point where I've uninstalled pretty much everything. I don't even have Skype. I don't play games anymore, and I don't think I'll be browsing Reddit much longer either, since I've started getting messages here too. Not just here, but on my phone as well. Texts in the middle of the night, random calls from unknown numbers. Last week I found traces of handprints on my kitchen window. Not just one or two, but dozens. A neighbor told me there'd been someone shouting outside my door when I was out buying groceries the other day. I'm considering calling the police, but I don't know what to say. I don't even know if I'm in danger. I can't get the bland face of the blameless out of my head. I dream of her asking me without moving her crinkled old mouth if I want it all to stop, and I say yes. I go to her, dressed as old Sturgis, standing alongside the others with my fishing rod. First, I ask her to end it all, but the others speak louder and she can't hear me. Then I ask again, trying to speak over the others. Soon I find myself screaming. We all scream, louder and louder, begging, pleading, crying for her attention. We all want it to stop, and she refuses to oblige. Instead, she just smiles, holding some sort of beautiful secret behind her pixelated dead eyes. I don't know what it is, but I want it. I'm starting to understand, but at the same time, I'm disgusted. Please, stay away from Hatchet Man Cove.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man working for a preservation zone learns that the cubs he's watching might be in more danger than just poachers. So, what have you ate? Because I know of that which eats lions.
There are 3 times as many lions in captivity as there are in the wild. That's an uncomfortable fact, but it also leaves the question, where the hell are all these lions? Sure, there are zoos, there are animal sanctuaries, there are even private breeders, similar to those of Netflix fame. Then there are preservation zones. Not many people know of these. There are less than a dozen in the US, and most of them are used for various kinds of endangered species. There's one in Florida that is exclusively for tigers. A small one in Oklahoma used for elephants. Then there is one in Arkansas, the Wren and Collin Pantherin Zone, the RCPZ. They keep lions. That's where I work. It is time we spoke about it. A lot of people haven't heard about this, and I think that is by design. The area is a lot larger than it needs to be, and most of it is wetland. When I started, there were in total about 30 lions separated into 3 prides. The lions were confined to 3 indoor shelters and a large caged outdoor space. There were veterinarians on site at every hour of the day, and a total of 45 employees on rotation. I was a part of the handlers, the group of employees with the highest overturn and the least insight. This is where it gets weird. The RCPZ has literal acres of wetlands that is seemingly unused. It just sits there. The shelter and caged area takes up less than a 1/7 of the total space. Lions aren't meant to wander around in swamps anyway, so why even have this area set up? I didn't question it too much at first. I started working there in 2016. I was part of a team of 4 handlers, working with the second pride. 2 grown males, 5 females, 6 cubs. The largest group of lions we had. I came straight out of high school, working my way up to a Ford veterinary school. I've always loved the big cats, and I heard about the RCPZ completely by accident. The area has literally no online presence, and they never put out ads when they look for new people. To this day, I still have no idea if they are privately owned or not. I think it might be government though, but I don't know. I found the RCPZ when driving through the wetlands with my buddy. We were running out of gas and desperately looking for a gas station when we found a wall along a stretch of forest. Along the wall, every 30 yards or so, was a small metal plate describing it as the Wren and Collin Pantherin Zone. I was curious and came back the next day. I followed the wall as far as I could and happened upon the main building. I was looking for a job, and there it was. The rest is history. My interviewer told me that the RCPZ was off the grid for a reason. Apparently, back in the 80s, there were serious cutbacks. Since then, there's been a policy to keep non-essential costs to a minimum. So, both electronics and digital equipment is more or less unheard of. The entire shelter is supposed to be able to run for at least a month, independently of the outside world, with no power or internet connection. I started working after 2 weeks of training. I mostly prepared meals and helped the vets monitor the cats with more serious health conditions. One of the males was getting old, the king of the pride. In all files and folders, he was referred to as T01, so we called him Toy. Sweetest old cat you can imagine, not a violent bone in his body. He would actually purr when he saw the handlers. Sounded like someone trying to start a lawnmower. As he got older, the vets informed us that there was nothing more we could do. It would be a matter of weeks before he simply couldn't walk anymore. His quality of life would drop, and he'd be in constant pain. They suggested that he be put down. This completely changed the atmosphere among the staff. I was not supposed to be part of the handlers who took Toy to his final resting place, but we had a staff shortage that day. My supervisor, Danielle, was in tears. She described to me that this was the hardest part of the job, but that we all had to take solace in the fact that Toy had lived a long and carefree life. The other handlers had to coax her out of the bathroom. She locked herself in there and cried until lunch. When it was time, we barely had to do anything. Toy was so happy to see us, he willingly came along. Except we weren't going back to the vets. We walked out the back of the chain link fence towards the wetlands. Looking at the other handlers, I knew better than to ask questions. They'd gone quiet. Toy could sense that something was wrong, and he tried his best to comfort us. He'd poke us with the tip of his nose, as if to ask us what was going on. We walked for at least 35 minutes, following old trails deeper into the wetlands. We had to stop at times to make sure Toy could keep up. He was losing parts of his mane by now, and he was clearly in pain. Sweet old man. Finally, we came to this big lake. I noticed there were several logs and trees around there with odd marks, as if hit by lightning or clawed by an animal. Danielle took Toy aside and asked the rest of us to start walking back. I wanted to say that we couldn't just leave her there with the lion, but no one else protested. I just looked at the others, who shook their heads. This wasn't a good time for questions. We did as we were told and walked away. Toy watched us curiously, but stayed with Danielle. As we left them behind, I looked at the other two handlers. Before I could even find the words, they interrupted me. "Don't look," one of them said. "Just accept it." A few minutes later, the ground started rumbling. The handlers said it was swamp gas, but I wasn't convinced. Swamp gas doesn't roar. It doesn't make the ground move. Also, it doesn't suddenly just stop, does it? That day changed the way I looked at my job. I started asking a few too many questions and reading a few too many documents. For example, there were at least 6 different academic papers on the Panthera atrox going around the facility. The North American lion, they went extinct thousands of years ago. The funny thing about it is that I can't find any of those papers online or their authors. I'm pretty sure most of them were written on site by the veterinarians. There were, of course, lots of areas I wasn't allowed in. Doors with reinforced locks and armed guards. Our ID badges were color-coded to show which corridors we were allowed to go through. And stepping out of bounds was grounds for immediate termination. The armed guards were not friendly. If anything, they could be a bit overzealous. Handlers and veterinarians were to be considered untrustworthy. So the default attitude of the guards was to doubt us and double-check our intentions. This made it hard to step out of bounds. I stayed at the RCPZ. Every time a lion would get too old or too wounded, it would be taken into the wetlands, never to return. Only the senior handlers were allowed to go out back. The rest of us were limited to the shelter and cage. Since we weren't understaffed again, I usually just watched Danielle and the other seniors lead the lion out the back from afar. It happened surprisingly often, at least once every 2 months. There was an incident in October of 2018. Danielle was taking R04, or Roy, out to the wetlands. She was gone longer than anticipated. Then the entire facility was put on lockdown. Every single armed guard got automatic weapons from the armory, and handlers were instructed to put all the lions back in the indoor shelter. There was a siren blaring, the kind you manually hand crank. The guards made sure no one entered or left the facility, but they didn't have the manpower to see what we were doing. Most of the handlers stayed in the lunchroom, but I took the opportunity to look around. One of the veterinarians left their keys in their overcoat, making it easy for me to borrow them for a while. I started looking through the administrative area, folder after folder of papers regarding prehistoric Ice Age creatures, mostly lions and bears. There was also a schedule posted on one of the walls where it said which lion was to be taken into the feeding ground and at what time. October of every year was marked in red ink as if to show that it was a particularly important time. We weren't allowed cell phones on the premises, or I'd have shared all of it here with you. The one thing that stood out the most was the many mentions of Tapex. At first I thought it was some kind of brand, but it was mentioned in several papers as well. The Tapex was some kind of prehistoric Ice Age creature. The true apex. That which eats lions, one paper was titled. We were locked in for the rest of the day. Danielle didn't come back, neither did Roy. Several guards mysteriously quit on the same day. It was a mess, and no one was telling us anything about it. Senior handler Lauren was promoted to supervisor, and there were a lot of changes. The veterinarians told us we had to triple the number of prides. 2 more enclosures were to be built, and the caged area had to be doubled in size. More lions were to be imported, and during construction, it was up to the handlers to make sure they could all live in close proximity. It was hell. Imagine 4 literal alpha creatures all competing, and you're supposed to be the referee to step up when things got too rough. We had to be on 24-hour surveillance, and some of the more aggressive creatures had to be sedated regularly. Even the calmer lions were agitated by the new arrivals. We were stressed to the brim, each and every one of us. It took us months to get things in order. We managed it, but it took a lot more effort than it should have. We were just pushed too far for weeks on end, and most of us were ready to quit. Then came a pay raise, increased vacation days, and finally, the pandemic. When the COVID pandemic struck, most of us realized that it'd be near impossible to get another job working with animals like this. The amount of lions being put out to pasture nearly tripled. Instead of once every 2 months, it was once every 3 or 4 weeks. The veterinarians kept referencing a brood and an updated containment protocol, but we were kept in the dark about the details. They were getting careless, and the word Tapex was getting thrown around more openly. Then came February 2021. I usually went home around 6 p.m. when the night crew arrived, so I was getting ready to leave. We were grooming one of the lionesses and cleaning up the shelter when the alarm went off, 5:45. The armed guards panicked. They told us we needed to bring out 3 lions immediately. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. 3 perfectly healthy lions were to be brought out and killed. The entire handler staff had to go out, me included. The lions weren't cooperating, and we had to force them out with catch-all poles. I was scared out of my mind. These big cats growling and snarling, as we had to force them out through openings in the chain-link fence. Armed guards with itchy trigger fingers. I was keeping madness at bay with a literal stick. It was getting dark, but a few of us had brought flashlights. I was one of them. My hands cramped around the catch-all as this massive animal protested and pulled against 4 handlers, trying to hold it off. The only other lights we had were the flashlights attached to the automatic weapons of the armed escort. Something was moving in the wetlands. Something big. I barely got a glimpse of it, but I saw scales. More movement, smaller. The lions were freaking out. The lioness in the far front, held back by 5 grown and trained handlers, was jumping and rolling. It was desperately trying to get away, meowing, screaming in protest, almost snapping its own neck. The second lion, an adolescent male, was getting aggressive. The lioness we were escorting in the back just stopped, frozen in fear. She looked back at us, as if pleading for us to release her. The Tapex struck. The lioness in the front was swept along by a wave of scale and teeth, instantly sinking back into the swamp. The catch-all was dragged along, and one of the handlers who were too slow to let go was dragged into the swamp. Once he got loose, I heard nothing but a short yell before he was pulled beneath the surface. He didn't come back up. It was chaos. The handlers in front of us dropped the adolescent male, who took off down the path. After about 30 feet, it just disappeared with a pained yelp. The handlers were freaking out. The armed guards were screaming at us to keep moving, to keep quiet, and to turn off our flashlights. Erica, one of the handlers, just took off running back towards the shelter. I heard a series of gunshots. For 1 second, it was completely quiet. We were in the eye of the storm. One by one, people around me started disappearing. Some handlers took off running, some just dived into the grass. The guards were firing at something, but I couldn't see what. In a matter of seconds, I realized I was the only one left holding the catch-all for a fully grown lioness, staring me down. She could easily have torn loose and mauled me, but she was just as terrified as I was. At first, I thought I saw 3 logs wash up from the swamp. It took a few moments for me to realize that it was actually claws, reptilian. Something was dragging itself out of the swamp, moving big chunks of debris. It was covered in undergrowth, making it look like the wetlands themselves were moving around us. The night air was filled with wet mud. The birds had long since fled, leaving only me, the lioness, and the tapex. I couldn't see it clearly. It had an uneven amount of eyes, all moving in different directions, vibrating with excitement, larger than hubcaps, a mouth wide enough to swallow a car, teeth like a bison made for crushing. It reminded me of the Cheshire Cat, locked in a sinister smile. The lioness was slowly backing away, ready to strike. I'd long since dropped the catch-all and fell to my knees in surrender. There was no way to win against something like this. The tapex looked at me with every single eye, vaguely reflected in my abandoned flashlight. It didn't breathe. It was surprisingly quiet. Those big square teeth drew closer, only to effortlessly push me out of the way. Some sort of appendage extended from the creature's left side. I could hear several more appendages splash against the water surface. I heard the catch-all rattle closer as the lioness was pulled into the creature's maw. She put up a good fight, twisting and turning every inch of the way, but it was no use. Bones broke like twigs. Blood dripped from the space in between the bucket-sized teeth. A sudden quiet as the roars and growls of the lion stopped. I closed my eyes, barely noticing I'd long since pissed myself. I felt the teeth drawing closer. "Please," I cried. "Please!" To my surprise, it stopped. It was close enough for me to touch with the tip of my nose. The stank of mud and innards was immense, nearly making me gag. "We'll bring more," I stammered. "You'll get more." The tapex retreated without hesitation. It made a sound. It was not a grunt, a growl, or a roar. It was a calculated and trained sound made with great effort. More. It left. I cried. The survivors made their way back. It was done. They are intelligent. Long ago, we took away their natural habitat. We hunted their main prey to extinction. At some point, we must have fought them, only to realize that it'd be easier to keep them happy and well-fed. They could just eat us and multiply, but as long as we keep them fed and happy, they don't. Were we to stop, they would simply leave the enclosure and wreak havoc. In a way, they are not the captives. We are. This is an apex species, just as intelligent, if not more, than we are. Those scratch-marked logs I mentioned earlier, yeah, those were scribbles. They have a written language. They live for thousands of years and only grow larger with age. We've tried to kill them, but they're immune to pretty much everything but high-yield explosives. Their intelligence allows them to coordinate and predict attacks. Remember those cutbacks I mentioned back in the 80s? Yeah, that was after an attempt to kill one of them. We lost a dozen people and they tore through 2 buildings, devouring every single lion we had. The repairs cost so much that the new management decided to completely abandon the idea. I've since been promoted to supervisor, surpassing the senior handler title completely. I have to go out with every feeding now. The tapex might get upset otherwise. They even know my name. There are 3 of them in total, 1 adolescent and 2 younger. I encountered the youngest that night. I want to reach out to those who work at the other zones. If the Tapex feeds on lions, what feeds on tigers? Elephants? There is little to no contact between these zones, and the top brass are on a very strict need-to-know basis. I'm pretty sure they'd kill me if I tried going to the press, but posting anonymously online doesn't seem to bother them. Who's gonna believe some nobody on Reddit after all?
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man getting home late from work discovers a blank picture frame in his apartment. So, even though life is picture perfect, I still don't know how I got all the empty frames.
I was having a good day at work. Not too much to do, just enough to make the time pass and keep me busy. I gave a work friend a ride home and had a long talk. Turns out we're both the youngest siblings in our families, which gave us a surprising amount of common ground. I got myself a chicken salad and drove home. I walked up the stairs to my apartment, and I opened the front door, and right there on the wall with all the smiling pictures of my friends and family was a blank picture frame. Empty. What the hell? While it didn't ruin my night, it made me start asking questions. I wouldn't just hang up a blank picture, and I wouldn't put it in the middle of the hallway. I have this large hallway mirror with pictures hung up on the side. It is kind of a centerpiece. Still, I couldn't recall what would have been in that frame, and there was no photo that had slipped out. I wasn't planning on framing anything either, or if I did, I wouldn't hang the frame up before I'd put in the photo. I'd be lying if I said that it really bothered me. It was an oddity at most. For a second, I caught myself in the mirror looking anxious. Why was I letting this get to me? The weekend was just around the corner. I just gave myself a smile and took the frame down. The next day, I came home to another empty frame. Now, this was strange. It wasn't empty earlier that day, or I would have taken it down along with the other one. There would be no reason for me to only take down one frame. So what had happened between now and then that caused this frame to turn blank? And why couldn't I remember what was in that frame when I looked at it just the day before? This time, I caught myself looking bothered. The hallway mirror doesn't lie. It was time to figure this out, weekend be damned. I made two conclusions. The first was that if the frame had been emptied the day before, I would have taken it down. Hence, it must have turned empty between when I left from work and when I came home, about 9 hours in total. The second conclusion was that the photos that were framed were completely missing. They hadn't just dropped out. The backing board was intact, and the little metal points holding it back were tight. Either someone took the photo out, or it just ceased to exist. That wasn't a comfortable conclusion. My mirror image seemed to agree. I checked the locks, the balcony, the windows, all of it. I lived on the second floor, but with enough determination, a thief could get in anywhere. Sure, there would be no reason for a thief to get in and just steal a single picture, leaving the frame, but there were crazies all over. Don't get me started on the next town over, where an entire neighborhood wears creepy masks. Everything was intact. No one would get in or out without breaking something, and nothing had been broken. I went to check my keys to see if anyone had stolen the spare, but it was still there. What surprised me, though, was the key to a bike lock. I didn't have a bike, did I? There was a bike rack out front, and I started trying the key. I got a lot of sneers from the neighbors, but I tried not to let it bother me. Finally, I found the bike the key belonged to. A sporty bike, a woman's model. The seating was much lower than I'd use, and seeing as how I am a man, I probably would have gotten another kind of model. Probably. Loved the colors, though. It gave me an uncomfortable thought. Maybe I wasn't just forgetting the pictures. Maybe I was forgetting whatever or whoever was inside them as well. Maybe I was forgetting people? As a precaution, I hurried back up to my apartment. I wrote down a description for each remaining picture. I also recorded them with my phone. I committed them each to memory to the best of my ability. The next day, as I was brushing my teeth, I noticed another empty picture frame. I nearly swallowed my toothpaste. My mouth felt dry. I couldn't remember what had been framed. I could feel myself cold sweating as my heart started to race. This was impossible. I'd been here the entire time. I picked up my phone to check the video I'd recorded, but I was told the file had been corrupted and couldn't be played. I caught a glimpse of my dilated pupils in the hallway mirror as I hurried into the kitchen. The note with all my descriptions had been torn to pieces. With shaking hands, I gathered every piece and tried to puzzle them back together. They were no bigger than the nail on my pinky finger. I must have been at it for hours. I'd gotten about halfway when I realized there were several missing pieces. They were probably the description for the photo in the now empty frame, I concluded. I was not just forgetting things, they were actively being removed. It was a disturbing thought. How do you make someone forget something or someone? That last thought resonated with me. Someone. I didn't feel like I was missing anyone, but then again, how would I know? If I'd forgotten about someone important in my life and all traces of them were gone, how would I know? This gave me an idea. In some places, a lack of things can be just as telling as having something. I went through my entire apartment, step by step, and noticed a few inconsistencies. There was an empty drawer in my bedroom. I wouldn't just let one drawer overflow and another remain empty. I would have spread things out. Someone had probably been using this drawer until recently. There were several empty folders on my computer. I may not be the brightest PC user, but I don't create empty folders for no reason, especially not in the image and movie default folders. There were entire shelves that were suspiciously empty in both my fridge and freezer. Again, why wouldn't I just spread things out? It felt like I was watching a mind-twisting game of Jenga, only the pieces that were picked out were parts of my life. As I took a shower to clear my head, I noticed two more things. One, there was a pale patch of skin on my right shoulder, with strange contours. There had probably been a tattoo there. Two, there was a mark on my left ring finger. So, until just recently, I'd worn an engagement ring. I sent a few messages to friends and family and checked my social media. There was no indications of any kind that I had been engaged. I got a few responses from confused friends. They had no idea what I was talking about, and they started asking if I was okay. I wasn't the problem here. The problem was that something was eating up my life, step by step, and I had no way to fight it. I stumbled back into the kitchen, poured myself a whiskey, and started making a list. A list of things someone like me would think was important enough to put in a picture on my wall. Parents, uncles, cousins, siblings, grandparents, pets, all of it. Then, I tried to match what I could remember to those categories. I remembered almost everything. There were a few blank spots. For example, I had no brothers or sisters, and I'd been single for a very long time. That didn't make any sense, though. Just a few days prior, I'd been talking to a work colleague about being the youngest sibling. Not just younger, like you are if you have a single older sibling, but youngest. That's what you are if you have more siblings than one. Plural. I couldn't remember having any brothers or sisters. I laid it all out. I had most probably completely forgotten about 2 siblings and a fiancé. I'll be the first to admit I didn't handle it very well. I called my mother after my 4th drink of whiskey, and I wasn't making much sense. She was worried. Of course, I had no brothers or sisters. Never had, and sadly, never would. "Check the photo albums," I screamed. "Check every album you've got, and you'll see. You'll see the empty pages." I sat down flat in the hallway with my 5th drink, having thrown my cell phone across the room. I stared at myself in the hallway mirror. I almost looked happy, despite feeling awful. That's what a good drink can do to you. It is like putting on a mask. I frowned as deep as I could, but it just looked like I was making a funny face. To be fair, the hallway mirror wasn't that great. It was slightly stretched, making you look a little thinner and taller than you really are. Kind of like a funhouse mirror, only to a lesser effect. I tried again to commit every photo to memory. My parents, my uncle, my grandparents, my cousin, standing in a field of those weird blue sunflowers. I counted them all, then counted them again. And on my 6th drink, I fell asleep on the floor, curled up in a fetal position. I was drifting in and out of sleep. Despite everything, I was happy no more pictures had disappeared. One by one, they'd gone away like petals picked from a flower. Then it stopped. There'd been no more. Maybe it was over, and whatever was removing them had gotten what it came for. Of course, there was another option. Maybe it was just waiting for me to fall asleep. That thought jolted me awake. I'd probably gotten a solid 3 hours of sleep, and it was the middle of the night. There was rustling in the kitchen. Not loud, but loud enough for me to hear it. It sounded like someone going through my cutlery. There was nothing special in there for someone to steal. Well, except for an old butter knife my cousin gave to me back when she was into whittling that one summer. The thought froze me. I checked the picture frames. All the photos were still there. There might still be time. I had a handgun in a secure locker in my bedroom, on a small shelf above my winter jackets. The key was right there in the hallway, on a separate keychain. I got the key, listening for movement in the kitchen. I could hear the rustling stop and the kitchen drawer being set back in place. If whoever was in there decided to check the bedroom, I'd be screwed. I held my breath and listened. I heard footsteps move into the bathroom. Of course, there was a cologne I'd gotten as a birthday gift last year. That was also from my cousin. But I could still remember her, so it wasn't too late. I opened the locker, loaded a clip, and turned the safety off. I stepped into the hallway, held the gun up high, and looked into the bathroom. I could hear someone looking for something just around the corner, next to the bathtub. But all I could see was the edge of a pair of jeans and a black t-shirt, and I had to act. "Stop!" I yelled. "Step out! Slowly!" The rustling stopped. "Hello!" The voice was dark and muddled, as if spoken underwater. It was distant, but near, and it echoed. It made the air tremble so hard that it made my stomach shiver. I almost threw up. "Step out with your hands." He did. I did. It was me. The hallway mirror was empty. There were a few differences. The person I was looking at was slightly taller and thinner. Stretched, like the image in the mirror, it was still mirroring my expression, but not the movements of my body. I looked terrified. "Hello," he repeated, sending another ripple through my guts. "Hands on your head," I said. "Stay back. I'm calling the police." "Hello." He didn't comply. I double-checked the safety, and it was off. A pinch of the trigger would be all it took. Instead of listening to me, the person stepped forward. I pulled the trigger. I shouldn't have done that. The bullet made a hole in his left shoulder. It went clean through. A few drops of blood escaped him, but evaporated against the floor in puffs of black smoke. The person had been keeping up an act, and now it felt threatened. In an instant, it turned into something else. The face twisted and turned. The jaw unhinged, and the tongue stuck straight up in the air like the rattle of a snake. Limbs grew longer and turned soft. A third arm grew from the stomach, tearing away the black t-shirt. Hands grew longer, fingers ending in bird-like talons. There was no way I would stand my ground against this walking nightmare. My instincts were battling each other. One side asking me to shut down and stay dead, the other telling me to run. There was no fighting to be done, only ways to flee. I took off running. It was nothing but luck that I remembered my trigger discipline. I started running down the flight of stairs. A neighbor was yelling, calling the police. Someone opened a door. I can't remember what happened to them or who they were. A scream I can't remember, silenced. Something the size of a football, being torn free from a torso. I got out into the cool night air. I was barefoot. For a second, I almost convinced myself it wasn't really happening. Standing out there in the real world, it just couldn't be happening. This doesn't happen in the real world. Then my nightmare came bursting through the door. It had grown. It extended its stomach to a bubble, like the abdomen of a spider. It had 3 arms and 4 legs, and there were more things growing. The head could barely be recognized. It had folded itself backwards, using an elongated tongue like an antenna sniffing the air. For all the things I've been forced to forget, this thing I can't help but remember. I couldn't forget it if I tried. Closing my eyes to this day, I can describe everything down to the texture of its skin. I kept running. The pitter-patter of skin flung against asphalt came closer. It was right behind me. I knew that if it caught me, I'd never have existed in the first place. Not even my mother would remember me. Everything I was, everything I'd done, gone in an instant. "Hello?" The rumble in my stomach came back, and I lost my balance. I fell forward, badly scraping my shoulder. "No!" was the only word I could muster. "No! No!" I was breathing too fast, and my head was barely getting any oxygen. I was panicking. I flipped around, laid on my back, and held up my handgun. It was almost on me. Teeth, naked skin, talons, and limbs. It was warm. I didn't want to disappear, not like this. That's when I noticed something in the distance. There was something sparkling just outside my balcony. There was a thin ripple in the air, like an umbilical cord. It was like looking at a black hole. There was nothing there to see but the lack of space. This ripple stretched from the nape of the creature up to a rectangular sparkle, hanging free in the air. The hallway mirror. It was stuck to it. Despite teeth, skin, and claw moving in to rip me apart, I aimed for the hallway mirror. It looked so odd, floating in midair, so far above ground. An anchor. Maybe it was adrenaline, or maybe I was lucky. But the shot connected. Shards spilled out of the frame, and the creature turned around. Parts of it were falling off, evaporating into black smoke. It hurried back towards the mirror. I followed it. It fell to its knees, arms flailing. It was trying to gather the shards, to desperately puzzle it all together. "Hello," it said again. This time the sound was high-pitched, almost shrieking. The creature had shrunk significantly, and as I got closer, I unloaded the entire clip into the rest of the mirror. Shards shattered against the sidewalk, and the creature was oozing with black smoke. A single eyeball tumbled out of its skull and fell into the largest of the shards. Moments later, the entire creature evaporated. I kept that shard. I can sometimes see something moving in it, but it is too small to harm anyone. If you listen closely to it, you can hear a tiny hello. The police came, but none of my neighbors could remember why someone would have called. They hadn't seen or heard anything. It was odd, though. One of the apartments had been left wide open. It was still furnished, but no one can remember anyone ever living there. I'm guessing we forgot about the tenant, but that the creature didn't get the time to clean up the belongings. Looking back at this, I'm certain I had a brother. I think he lived in the outskirts of the city, and that he disappeared as he was out camping with his friends. I also think I had a sister. I'm certain she was the one who gave me the mirror to begin with. She was smart, studied in Europe for several years. She was blinded in an accident a few years ago. I haven't figured out when or how she disappeared. My fiancée was the last to disappear. Despite my best efforts, I haven't been able to figure out anything about her. She is a complete mystery to me. Trying to mourn her knots my stomach. I'm trying to imagine what we would have done together, what places we'd seen, or how long we'd been together, but I just can't. If I only had something to remember her by, something real, I could have made peace with it. There's just no closure. It feels odd to mourn something I can't know I had, but I do. It hurts. I sometimes wake up crying, holding a pillow. My body remembers something I don't. The shower feels empty in the morning. I feel miserable shopping alone, all these little ordinary things that I should be used to feel slightly awe. I guess there are things you just can't forget. I'm posting here to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. If you have blank picture frames, take it seriously. Check your mirrors, make lists, try to remember. Hell, smash every mirror you have. And if anyone has any idea what the hell I should do with this shard, feel free to share. I don't mind having it, but there must be someone who can use it for something. I can't just call a scientist about it. Good luck out there.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a recently divorced man moves into a new place when his neighbors start to bug him. So it might be true that freaks come out at night, because my neighbors are nesting.
I'm not a conspiracy nut. I don't believe the moon landing was fake, or that there's a secret world government run by lizards. I'm a sane, rational human being. With that said, I'm convinced my neighbor is building some sort of nest. I'm not joking. Let me explain. I got divorced about a year ago and had to move to a new place on short notice. I got a pretty decent 2-room apartment on the 3rd floor of an old apartment building. The place was probably built in the 50s, but I couldn't get a cleaner or cheaper apartment that isn't out of my price range. I moved in and tried to pick up the pieces of my life. At least my wife took all the heavy and expensive boxes in the divorce settlement. I only saw my neighbors in passing. There are 2 apartments per floor, and 5 floors in total. I live on the 3rd floor, and straight across from me is a retired elderly woman. She lives with 2 cats, and has a younger man visiting about once a week, probably her son. The 2 apartments below me aren't that interesting. A childless couple, and straight across from them, 3 college students. No big deal. The apartment straight above me was probably the most important one. That's the one you gotta look out for when moving to a new place. If anything is gonna disturb you, that'll be the one. You don't want them to be clog dancing enthusiasts, manic cleaners, or the kind of idiot who listens to music with loud speakers on the bus. The guy who lived above me, Hugo, was an ideal neighbor. He was some kind of accountant who worked at the sanitation department. He kept to himself, never moved a single piece of furniture, and didn't move around much. No slamming doors, no running. He was pretty big, body-wise, with a sizable pair of glasses and thinning hairline. He lived alone, seemed friendly, and he was simply the best neighbor I'd ever had. God bless that silent, chunky angel. So, let's talk about the nesting. It started a few months ago, in December. It was at the height of the 2020 pandemic, so I was trying to get some minor Christmas shopping done in the off hours of the day. I have flexible work hours, and I can work from home, so I can go out whenever I need to. I was getting a photo printed for my mom and was trying to find a fitting frame. I found this small store with a going out of business sale, and I noticed Hugo browsing some silverware further. Only he wasn't alone. Christ, I'm having a hard time describing this woman. She was half his weight, an entire head taller, and she wasn't even wearing heels. Neck like a swan, thin shoulders, and gorgeous nutmeg hair. She had a peculiar smell, like a mix of a bittersweet flower and honey. Pale, flawless skin, red nails. I couldn't stop staring at her. Hugo told her something funny, and her laugh seemed to light up the entire room. She grabbed his arm, kissed his cheek, and whispered something back to him. He smiled. I'd never seen him smile before. I saw them buy plates, silverware, and a few blankets. Nothing special. She paid for the whole thing and carried it all out in a tote bag. Hugo just hung to her every word, but they both seemed to genuinely care for one another. It didn't make sense to me. They were basically different species of people. Over the coming days, I noticed some changes. I could sometimes hear laughter coming from the stairwell, and I could hear furniture being moved around during the day. Hugo got himself a new car, one of those large 6-seaters. They were drilling and hammering a few times a week, and at 2 occasions, I noticed Hugo and his girlfriend carrying large carpets up the stairs. He seemed so happy. I don't want to sound like a stalker, but I was curious about the 2 of them. I noticed they'd changed the names on the door. That's how I learned her name. Sandra. After going through a painful divorce, I'll be the first to admit I was jealous. Sandra was gorgeous, and it didn't make sense for her to be with a guy like Hugo. I was spending weeks on end in lockdown, alone, hearing laughter coming through the ceiling. Yeah, it made me bitter. Sue me. Then her family moved in. Hugo helped carry a lot of heavy boxes up those stairs, and I caught a glimpse of the whole crew through my back window. Sandra had 2 younger sisters, both just old enough to start high school. Then there was her dad, who looked to be in his early 60s. The whole lot of them were beautiful. Everyone smiling, eager to help. Healthy, happy, well-dressed. You could fall in love with either one of them with just a picture. It was weird for so many of them to move into such a small apartment, but I'd seen Stranger Things. I figured it was a temporary thing, but I changed my mind once I saw the moving vans. Yes, that's vans plural. 3 vans full of boxes, not a single piece of furniture. Hugo looked exhausted carrying those heavy boxes up and down several flights of stairs. Sandra didn't seem bothered at all. I know, looking at them like that was creepy. I was painfully single and, most of all, bored. As December turned to January, the whole family had settled in quite well. They were still decent neighbors. The hammering and drilling stopped early on, and at most I would just hear them laughing at something or watching TV. Hugo would leave for work every day, and he'd always leave with a smile. He lost a lot of weight, and he'd gotten himself both contact lenses and fitting clothes. He looked good, not compared to Sandra, but still. He was getting there. I ran into him in the stairwell once, when I was throwing out some trash. He was just coming back from a jog. chugging some kind of sports drink. Hell, he was in better shape than I was. He smiled. "Hey, you're in 3B, right?" he asked. "Sure am. And you're 4B. "That's right," he smiled. "Look, if we ever get a bit too noisy, let me know, all right?" "Sure," I nodded. "It's fine, really. No bother. You guys holding out okay?" Yeah, great actually. My fiance got the bug early, so she's got the antibodies. The rest of us just have to wait for the needle." No doubt, no doubt. We smiled at one another and went our separate ways. Just a few steps later, I had to stop myself. I was too curious. "Hey, I gotta ask, how do you guys all live together in that small space? Doesn't it get crowded?" "Always room for family." Hugo smiled and finished his drink. No room too small, no problem too big. That was the last time I saw him. I stopped seeing him go to work. His car stayed put in the parking lot all day. I'd see Sandra around town alone, her sisters as well. I noticed her dad throwing out some trash every now and then, but that was it. Hugo just wasn't around anymore. I didn't think too hard about it at first. But in early March, I realized I hadn't seen him in over a month. His name was still on their door, though. Him and Sandra. This is when I started to get a bad vibe. I started to make a habit out of taking notes of things that seemed weird or out of place with Sandra and her family. Like they're trash bags. They're not just trash bags. They're this big blue mesh-type bags that are heat-sealed at the top. Looks like something you'd use to throw out biohazardous waste from a hospital. They were round and packed to the brim like beach balls. Then there were the nightly excursions. Once the sun started to set, all the sisters would take Hugo's car and go for a ride. They'd only be gone for a few hours, but they did it consistently for at least 4 days every week, mostly on the weekends. But the weirdest thing started in mid-March. For some time, their dad had been throwing out more trash than usual, sometimes several times a day. And at night, I'd hear these weird noises. It sounded like a mix of an engine and a nature documentary. This low, constant droning noise. I tried recording it in my bathroom, where the sound was clearest, but it doesn't sound like much. You can check it for yourself here if you want. I'd hear that noise at least once a day, sometimes for an hour or two. It wasn't loud, but it is such an unusual sound that you can't help but to listen. Things escalated gradually. Sometimes I'd watch them come back from their drive with duffel bags full of something. At one point, they just had armfuls of branches and firewood. I made notes of all of it, complete with time and date. I was a bit obsessed. I even got out in the middle of the night to check one of their big blue trash bags. I poked one open and felt this intense dirt smell. The bag was just full of some kind of white ceramic and broken glass. I took a piece of the white stuff back home just to get a closer look. At this point, I still thought they were just weird people who'd done something to Hugo. I was still trying to piece it all together. That's the literal thought that made me realize this was something else entirely. To piece something together. I gathered the rest of the white ceramics from the bag and pieced it together. Super glue. An egg. An actual egg. Large as a football. This was the remaining shell. I didn't know what to think. I just hid it. All of a sudden I started seeing that family in a whole new light. Branches, boxes, bags, full of something smelling of dirt. In my notebook, I just made a single entry. They're nesting. At this point, it was the beginning of April, and my job was opening up to having people coming back into work. We were forced to come in at least twice a week to note our hours and report to our supervisor. I didn't mind getting out of the apartment for a while, even if I had to wear a mask and keep a lot of distance. It was fine. Once, when I was coming home, I noticed my front door open. The old lady across from me was standing in the hallway, holding one of her cats. Something was going on, and the neighbors were antsy. Just as I was about to enter, Sandra stepped out of my apartment. She fixed her brilliant smile on me, that creepy, gorgeous smile. "We heard noises," she said. "The door was open and your fire alarm was going crazy." Is there... "It's fine," she said. "The super opened it up to see if there was a fire." I walked up to her and she stepped aside. I gave her a long, questioning look. "Fire alarms don't just start by themselves," I said. "Where's the super?" He got a call, said the lady across the hall. He looked upset. He did? Nodded Sandra. Sounded serious. I'm sorry if you were all worried, I said, but please respect my privacy. You can't just go in. I was just waiting for the super to get back. He forgot to lock your door. Well, now I'm here, and I can lock it just fine. Thank you. I closed the door, locked it, and looked over my apartment. My notes were gone. The eggshells were gone. My computer had a hard drive malfunction, and there were screws missing from the chassis. Now they knew. The sisters started noticing me more and more. They waved at me every time they took their nightly drive. Their dad gave me a cold look every time he threw out the trash, now in regular non-blue bags. The sounds at night stopped, and I never saw them carry anything inside. I was sure they'd just switched up their schedule, but I wasn't sure. I'd run into them more frequently in person. They'd accidentally meet me in the stairwell every time I went outside. Sandra was always polite, but that smile was hiding something. I felt it. Then there was water damage in the ceiling of my bedroom. Something foul smelled. There was something heavy up there, and the ceiling had started to bulge. I called the supervisor about it, but some man kept telling me that I had to have the papers for an insurance claim before they could fix it. It was bullshit, and they were stalling for time. I think they were trying to cover the fact that the super hadn't been in for at least a month. I'm not stupid. I knew the super didn't have an assistant. The thing is, I hadn't really been paying attention to my other neighbors, the couple downstairs and the college roommates. They moved out a month earlier. I didn't even think about it. Now I had 8 new neighbors, and they were all very, very pretty. 6 women, 2 men, all in their early 20s and drop dead gorgeous. The entire apartment complex was full of them now. That weird sound I used to hear seemed to come from every direction at night. They were not even hiding it anymore. They were just carrying all kinds of weird trash up to their apartments. Branches, firewood, plastic, bag after bag of fertilizer, and planting dirt. Last week, there were more moving vans coming. Everyone was going outside to help our new, beautiful neighbors carry their stuff inside. I felt trapped in my own apartment and decided once and for all to just leave. Once I stepped into the stairwell, I noticed 8 of them looking at me from all over. They were on the floors above, below, even straight across. Yeah, seems the old lady with the cats moved out as well. Then they screamed. They all just screamed in unison. They were like animals trying to scare away a predator. I could hear boxes dropping and footsteps approaching. I panicked. I glanced at them and burst into a sprint. There were open mouths screaming, feet running, eyes large and dark, like cats getting ready to pounce on a mouse. I took the fire escape out the back, ran, twisted my ankle, and got in my car. I just drove. Something pounded on my back windshield, but I got away. And now I'm here, posting about it. I'm not sure I should look into this. I just want to get as far away as possible. I don't think I'm safe yet. I'm staying with my brother, and just the other day he told me there was a beautiful young woman asking for me while I was at the grocery store. Reddit, I don't know what this is or what they're doing. All I know is that they're nesting and people are going missing. God, I can't get that noise out of my head, that scream, those faces.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a recently divorced man moves into a new place when his neighbors start to bug him. So it might be true that freaks come out at night, because my neighbors are nesting.
I'm not a conspiracy nut. I don't believe the moon landing was fake, or that there's a secret world government run by lizards. I'm a sane, rational human being. With that said, I'm convinced my neighbor is building some sort of nest. I'm not joking. Let me explain. I got divorced about a year ago and had to move to a new place on short notice. I got a pretty decent 2-room apartment on the 3rd floor of an old apartment building. The place was probably built in the 50s, but I couldn't get a cleaner or cheaper apartment that isn't out of my price range. I moved in and tried to pick up the pieces of my life. At least my wife took all the heavy and expensive boxes in the divorce settlement. I only saw my neighbors in passing. There are 2 apartments per floor, and 5 floors in total. I live on the 3rd floor, and straight across from me is a retired elderly woman. She lives with 2 cats. and has a younger man visiting about once a week, probably her son. The two apartments below me aren't that interesting. A childless couple, and straight across from them, 3 college students. No big deal. The apartment straight above me was probably the most important one. That's the one you gotta look out for when moving to a new place. If anything is gonna disturb you, that'll be the one. You don't want them to be clog dancing enthusiasts, manic cleaners, or the kind of idiot who listens to music with loud speakers on the bus. The guy who lived above me, Hugo, was an ideal neighbor. He was some kind of accountant who worked at the sanitation department. He kept to himself, never moved a single piece of furniture, and didn't move around much. No slamming doors, no running. He was pretty big, body-wise, with a sizable pair of glasses and thinning hairline. He lived alone, seemed friendly, and he was simply the best neighbor I'd ever had. God bless that silent, chunky angel. So, let's talk about the nesting. It started a few months ago, in December. It was at the height of the 2020 pandemic, so I was trying to get some minor Christmas shopping done in the off hours of the day. I have flexible work hours, and I can work from home, so I can go out whenever I need to. I was getting a photo printed for my mom and was trying to find a fitting frame. I found this small store with a going out of business sale, and I noticed Hugo browsing some silverware further. Only he wasn't alone. Christ, I'm having a hard time describing this woman. She was half his weight, an entire head taller, and she wasn't even wearing heels. Neck like a swan, thin shoulders, and gorgeous nutmeg hair. She had a peculiar smell, like a mix of a bittersweet flower and honey. Pale, flawless skin, red nails. I couldn't stop staring at her. Hugo told her something funny, and her laugh seemed to light up the entire room. She grabbed his arm, kissed his cheek, and whispered something back to him. He smiled. I'd never seen him smile before. I saw them buy plates, silverware, and a few blankets. Nothing special. She paid for the whole thing and carried it all out in a tote bag. Hugo just hung to her every word, but they both seemed to genuinely care for one another. It didn't make sense to me. They were basically different species of people. Over the coming days, I noticed some changes. I could sometimes hear laughter coming from the stairwell, and I could hear furniture being moved around during the day. Hugo got himself a new car, one of those large 6-seaters. They were drilling and hammering a few times a week, and at 2 occasions, I noticed Hugo and his girlfriend carrying large carpets up the stairs. He seemed so happy. I don't want to sound like a stalker, but I was curious about the two of them. I noticed they'd changed the names on the door. That's how I learned her name. Sandra. After going through a painful divorce, I'll be the first to admit I was jealous. Sandra was gorgeous, and it didn't make sense for her to be with a guy like Hugo. I was spending weeks on end in lockdown, alone, hearing laughter coming through the ceiling. Yeah, it made me bitter. Sue me. Then her family moved in. Hugo helped carry a lot of heavy boxes up those stairs, and I caught a glimpse of the whole crew through my back window. Sandra had 2 younger sisters, both just old enough to start high school. Then there was her dad, who looked to be in his early 60s. The whole lot of them were beautiful. Everyone smiling, eager to help. Healthy, happy, well-dressed. You could fall in love with either one of them with just a picture. It was weird for so many of them to move into such a small apartment, but I'd seen Stranger Things. I figured it was a temporary thing, but I changed my mind once I saw the moving vans. Yes, that's vans plural. 3 vans full of boxes, not a single piece of furniture. Hugo looked exhausted carrying those heavy boxes up and down several flights of stairs. Sandra didn't seem bothered at all. I know, looking at them like that was creepy. I was painfully single and, most of all, bored. As December turned to January, the whole family had settled in quite well. They were still decent neighbors. The hammering and drilling stopped early on, and at most I would just hear them laughing at something or watching TV. Hugo would leave for work every day, and he'd always leave with a smile. He lost a lot of weight, and he'd gotten himself both contact lenses and fitting clothes. He looked good, not compared to Sandra, but still. He was getting there. I ran into him in the stairwell once, when I was throwing out some trash. He was just coming back from a jog, chugging some kind of sports drink. Hell, he was in better shape than I was. He smiled. "Hey, you're in 3B, right?" he asked. "Sure am. And you're 4B. "That's right," he smiled. "Look, If we ever get a bit too noisy, let me know, all right? Sure, I nodded. It's fine, really. No bother. You guys holding out okay? Yeah, great actually. My fiance got the bug early, so she's got the antibodies. The rest of us just have to wait for the needle. No doubt, no doubt. We smiled at one another and went our separate ways. Just a few steps later, I had to stop myself. I was too curious. Hey, I gotta ask. How do you guys all live together in that small space? Doesn't it get crowded? Always room for family? Hugo smiled and finished his drink. No room too small, no problem too big. That was the last time I saw him. I stopped seeing him go to work. His car stayed put in the parking lot all day. I'd see Sandra around town alone, her sisters as well. I noticed her dad throwing out some trash every now and then, but that was it. Hugo just wasn't around anymore. I didn't think too hard about it at first. But in early March, I realized I hadn't seen him in over a month. His name was still on their door, though. Him and Sandra. This is when I started to get a bad vibe. I started to make a habit out of taking notes of things that seemed weird or out of place with Sandra and her family. Like they're trash bags. They're not just trash bags. They're this big blue mesh-type bags that are heat-sealed at the top. Looks like something you'd use to throw out biohazardous waste from a hospital. They were round and packed to the brim like beach balls. Then there were the nightly excursions. Once the sun started to set, all the sisters would take Hugo's car and go for a ride. They'd only be gone for a few hours, but they did it consistently for at least 4 days every week, mostly on the weekends. But the weirdest thing started in mid-March. For some time, their dad had been throwing out more trash than usual, sometimes several times a day. And at night, I'd hear these weird noises. It sounded like a mix of an engine and a nature documentary. This low, constant droning noise. I tried recording it in my bathroom, where the sound was clearest, but it doesn't sound like much. You can check it for yourself here if you want. I'd hear that noise at least once a day, sometimes for an hour or two. It wasn't loud, but it is such an unusual sound that you can't help but to listen. Things escalated gradually. Sometimes I'd watch them come back from their drive with duffel bags full of something. At one point, they just had armfuls of branches and firewood. I made notes of all of it, complete with time and date. I was a bit obsessed. I even got out in the middle of the night to check one of their big blue trash bags. I poked one open and felt this intense dirt smell. The bag was just full of some kind of white ceramic and broken glass. I took a piece of the white stuff back home just to get a closer look. At this point, I still thought they were just weird people who'd done something to Hugo. I was still trying to piece it all together. That's the literal thought that made me realize this was something else entirely. To piece something together. I gathered the rest of the white ceramics from the bag and pieced it together. Super glue. An egg. An actual egg. Large as a football. This was the remaining shell. I didn't know what to think. I just hid it. All of a sudden I started seeing that family in a whole new light. Branches, boxes, bags, full of something smelling of dirt. In my notebook, I just made a single entry. They're nesting. At this point, it was the beginning of April, and my job was opening up to having people coming back into work. We were forced to come in at least twice a week to note our hours and report to our supervisor. I didn't mind getting out of the apartment for a while, even if I had to wear a mask and keep a lot of distance. It was fine. Once, when I was coming home, I noticed my front door open. The old lady across from me was standing in the hallway, holding one of her cats. Something was going on, and the neighbors were antsy. Just as I was about to enter, Sandra stepped out of my apartment. She fixed her brilliant smile on me, that creepy, gorgeous smile. "We heard noises," she said. "The door was open and your fire alarm was going crazy." Is there... "It's fine," she said. "The super opened it up to see if there was a fire." I walked up to her and she stepped aside. I gave her a long, questioning look. "Fire alarms don't just start by themselves," I said. "Where's the super?" "He got a call," said the lady across the hall. "He looked upset." "He did?" nodded Sandra. "Sounded serious." "I'm sorry if you were all worried," I said, "but please respect my privacy. You can't just go in." I was just waiting for the super to get back. He forgot to lock your door. Well, now I'm here, and I can lock it just fine. Thank you. I closed the door, locked it, and looked over my apartment. My notes were gone. The eggshells were gone. My computer had a hard drive malfunction, and there were screws missing from the chassis. Now they knew. The sisters started noticing me more and more. They waved at me every time they took their nightly drive. Their dad gave me a cold look every time he threw out the trash, now in regular non-blue bags. The sounds at night stopped, and I never saw them carry anything inside. I was sure they'd just switched up their schedule, but I wasn't sure. I'd run into them more frequently in person. They'd accidentally meet me in the stairwell every time I went outside. Sandra was always polite, but that smile was hiding something. I felt it. Then there was water damage in the ceiling of my bedroom. Something foul smelled. There was something heavy up there, and the ceiling had started to bulge. I called the supervisor about it, but some man kept telling me that I had to have the papers for an insurance claim before they could fix it. It was bullshit, and they were stalling for time. I think they were trying to cover the fact that the super hadn't been in for at least a month. I'm not stupid. I knew the super didn't have an assistant. The thing is, I hadn't really been paying attention to my other neighbors, the couple downstairs and the college roommates. They moved out a month earlier. I didn't even think about it. Now I had 8 new neighbors, and they were all very, very pretty. 6 women, 2 men, all in their early 20s and drop dead gorgeous. The entire apartment complex was full of them now. That weird sound I used to hear seemed to come from every direction at night. They were not even hiding it anymore. They were just carrying all kinds of weird trash up to their apartments. Branches, firewood, plastic, bag after bag of fertilizer, and planting dirt. Last week, there were more moving vans coming. Everyone was going outside to help our new, beautiful neighbors carry their stuff inside. I felt trapped in my own apartment and decided once and for all to just leave. Once I stepped into the stairwell, I noticed 8 of them looking at me from all over. They were on the floors above, below, even straight across. Yeah, seems the old lady with the cats moved out as well. Then they screamed. They all just screamed in unison. They were like animals trying to scare away a predator. I could hear boxes dropping and footsteps approaching. I panicked. I glanced at them and burst into a sprint. There were open mouths screaming, feet running, eyes large and dark, like cats getting ready to pounce on a mouse. I took the fire escape out the back, ran, twisted my ankle, and got in my car. I just drove. Something pounded on my back windshield, but I got away. And now I'm here, posting about it. I'm not sure I should look into this. I just want to get as far away as possible. I don't think I'm safe yet. I'm staying with my brother, and just the other day he told me there was a beautiful young woman asking for me while I was at the grocery store. Reddit, I don't know what this is or what they're doing. All I know is that they're nesting and people are going missing. God, I can't get that noise out of my head, that scream, those faces.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bump in the night. On tonight's episode, a man and his wife starts to try for a family when they are gifted a strange sunflower. So what's a memorable gift you've received? Because we received the sad sunflower.
A few months ago, my wife Julie and I decided to start trying for a family. We moved out of the big city to a small midwestern Minnesota town, not too far from Grove City. It was time for a change. Hell, we even decided to stop smoking. We found a cheap, recently renovated flat. The entire complex was built in the 50s, but the apartments themselves had been fixed up just recently. We were told by the landlord, an absolutely stunning young woman, that most of the previous tenants decided to move out rather than wait for renovations to finish up. The place was basically brand new. Our apartment was on the ground floor. We didn't want to think about baby-proofing a balcony on the 3rd or 4th floor, and we figured this would only be a stepping stone to getting our own house. Anyway, Julie had left her job as a high school teacher behind, while I'd gotten a job as manager at a local warehouse. I'd already worked as a manager previously for the same company, so it was just a matter of finding a suitable transfer. The previous tenants had left us a gift. Sitting alone in the kitchen window was a blue sunflower. At first I thought it was plastic, but it was perfectly real. The color was striking. It was still yellow in the middle, with black spots. But the leaves were a sparkling ocean blue. The flower pot was hand-painted with a small landscape and a shining sun. In plain black text it said, "The Sad Sunflower." "That is just too cute," smiled Julie. "We've got to keep it." I've never been able to say no to her. That big smile of hers could make me do anything. If she wanted to keep the sad sunflower, so be it. I watered it and turned it facing outwards. Oddly enough, it had been leaning inwards towards the apartment. I thought sunflowers were supposed to follow the sun. Julie just loved it. She already had a good feeling about this place. I wasn't convinced yet, but I figured it was just nicotine withdrawal. Over the following days, I was getting adjusted to my job. I brought in a cake to get to know everyone. Their previous manager had personal issues and suddenly left town, so there was urgent need for someone to step in. It was just great timing for me. Julie was still looking for a new job. There were a few schools nearby that she was going to look up, but we needed a second car first. Money was tight after the move, so we decided to wait a few weeks before making any big purchases. So Julie spent most of her days at home. She'd been clear about wanting to be a stay-at-home mom once we had a family of our own. So maybe she was just trying to get used to the idea. Call it a practice run. She would do a lot of housework and handle the groceries. I usually cooked dinner, but she would handle the dishes. One day after coming home from work, I noticed her humming a strange tune while watering the sad sunflower. I'd never heard it before. "You're my friend, I'll sing your tune, a setting sun to rising moon. I ask you, buddy, buddy blue, won't you be a sunflower too?" I took off my shoes and joined her in the kitchen. She'd hum the tune over and over, checking every leaf on that sparkling blue plant. It was leaning inwards again, away from the sun. Almost like a dog asking for a head scratch. "What's that song?" I asked. "What song?" I asked her several times over. She honestly didn't know what I was talking about. I read it out loud and she just blanked. The same way I could have sworn I heard her sing it, she swore she hadn't. I turned the plant back outwards, towards the sun. The next day, it was leaning back in. That tune started to haunt me. I could hear Julie sing it in the shower, while doing the dishes, while tying her shoes. Over time, she came to accept that she was singing it, but she wasn't doing it consciously. It was like a brain teaser. "I must have heard it somewhere," she said. "Some kind of nursery rhyme." I couldn't blame her for having her mind occupied with kids' stuff. It was pretty much all we talked about. We just started trying for a baby, and it would just be a matter of time before our lives would change forever. It was stressful, but exciting. More of an adventure than any bungee jumping could ever replicate. Julie got a part-time teaching job at the local high school. One of their teachers were going on maternity leave, so they needed someone to step in and help out with social studies. We didn't have a second car, but one of the guys I worked with lived just down the street. So we started to carpool. I thought having some independence and getting out of the apartment would do Julie some good. It did at first. She had so much energy when she got home after a long day. Still, she would beeline towards her sad sunflower, take care of it, water it, and only then would she concentrate on anything else. She didn't even take her shoes off. That plant was by far her most favorite thing in the world. Honestly, I didn't get it. She still hummed that melody. "You're my friend, I'll sing your tune, a setting sun to rising moon." I once got back home early, only to notice that the sunflower was gone. Julie wasn't home from work, and the thing was just gone. Later, when Julie came home, it all made sense. She held that thing under her arm as she walked through the door. It was almost like someone holding a baby. She had a grocery bag swinging underneath. I'll be the first to admit I didn't handle it very well. "You're bringing it to work?" I accused. "What is going on with you?" "It's nothing." Julie sighed. It's like having a safety blanket. It doesn't mean anything." "Then throw it away." She stared at me in disbelief. I took a step forward to help her with her groceries, and she recoiled. Her eyes were dilated, and it looked like she was on the edge of a fight or flight reaction. I just stopped. "What the hell?" "Don't you dare," she spat. "Don't you dare." After that, Julie slept on the couch for a couple of nights. It was her idea, not mine. She would give me these long, accusing looks from across the room whenever I was in line of sight of that damn plant. It was still facing inwards. I'm sure the damn thing was moving or turning back every time I tried to face it outwards. I started hearing things at night. I once peeked out of the bedroom to see Julie water and prune that plant in the middle of the night. She'd sing to it over and over, the same rhyme. In the moonlight, it looked like she didn't even blink. 2:30 in the morning, and there she was caressing the leaves. There were other things as well. Foul-smelling dirt in the wastebasket. Dark blue sunflower seeds scattered around the bathroom. I didn't know what to make of it, but Julie and I weren't really talking anymore. She had no problem talking to that plant, though. I ask you, Buddy Blue, won't you be a sunflower too? It all came to a boiling point the day when Julie didn't come home from work. Of course, she'd taken the plant with her. I tried her phone, but she didn't pick up. At 7 in the evening, I was getting seriously worried. I called the school where she worked, but of course it was closed. Instead, I called her coworker, Miss Marriott. "This is Claire," she answered. "Hey, I'm calling about Julie. This is her husband," I said. "Sorry about calling you like this." "No, it's fine. Is everything all right?" "When Julie came to work, did she seem okay? Did she do anything unusual?" "I'm not following." "Well, like, did she bring..." "No, I'm sorry. I meant..." "What do you mean with came to work?" Apparently, Julie had quit her temp job about a week ago. I rushed down the street to my coworker and asked to borrow their car. They didn't mind, and even asked if there was anything they could do to help. I didn't even know where to start, so I just thanked them and left. I drove around town for hours, checking every open store, every alley, every side road. Finally, I stopped for gas. As I went inside to pay and get a soda, I noticed the clerk humming a tune. She was reading a magazine and humming away, barely noticing I was even there. I'd recognize that melody anywhere. "Where'd you hear that?" I asked. She just looked up at me like she'd woken up from a nap. She had no idea what I was talking about. I just paid and left, figuring Julie had been there. She was close. There was a small dirt road not too far from the gas station, leading down to a fishing lake. All you could catch there was smallmouth bass, but it was a great little place to have a barbecue. I drove down the road, following a hunch. It paid off. Just a few minutes later, I saw our car on the side of the road. The door was still open. Lights were blinking. It was swarming with mosquitoes. I parked alongside it and brought out a flashlight. There was a small trail through the woods, leading up to a clearing next to the lake. It was the only place she could have gone, unless she was just mindlessly going random directions. I didn't have to go far to hear her. There was no wind, so even a slight noise could be heard from far away. "I ask you, Buddy Blue..." The same damn rhyme. Next to the trail, I noticed small, bright stalks reaching out of the soil. They looked freshly planted. I could guess what kind of plant they were, even though they hadn't bloomed yet. "Won't you be a sunflower too?" I stepped into the clearing. I could barely see them all with that tiny cone of light. There were hundreds of them, spread out in a circle. In the middle was Julie, reciting her rhyme over and over. She'd taken off her clothes, and I could see mosquitoes swarming her. It didn't seem to bother her. The melody in her song was gone, turned to a mantra. She was standing with her back towards me, holding her hands in front of her like a cup. She suddenly made a harsh coughing sound and bent forward. I took a few steps and stopped. Every single sunflower turned towards me, blue leaves vibrating like rattlesnakes. Julie turned around. Sunflower seeds were dripping from her mouth. In her cupped hands, she held the same kind of foul-smelling tar dirt that I'd found in the wastebasket. Her eyes were bright blue. Her teeth were stained black. "You're my friend, I'll sing your tune." Sunflower seeds kept falling from the edge of her mouth. She kept coughing, almost choking. She was constantly on the edge of inhaling the seeds into her lungs. Her singing voice was broken and struggling. Still, she smiled. The same smile that could get me to do anything. A setting sun to rising moon. The flowers turned back towards her, vibrating. Tiny leaves clapping in appreciation. I didn't know what to do. I was horrified. I was angry. I was desperate. I froze. Julie walked up to me, holding a large seed between her lips. She took my hands and leaned forward to kiss me. I've never smelled anything so putrid in my life. I think that's what snapped me out of it. It was the only time I've refused a kiss from her. I'm not proud of what happened next, but I didn't have a choice. I grabbed Julie and threw her over my shoulder. She protested wildly, scratching and beating me. She had to stop over and over to throw up more seeds and dirt. I just ignored the wounds on my neck and scalp and kept carrying her. I'd locked her in the back seat of the car and turned on the child locks. As I shut the doors, she was hysterical, screaming and flailing in the back seat like a possessed toddler. I got a jerrycan from my car. It was half full. That was enough. I stopped smoking the day we moved into our new apartment, but I still had my lighter. When I stepped back out into that clearing, I could hear something moving. I ignored it. I dumped every drop of gasoline that I had and just set the whole field on fire. I left the lighter behind. As I stepped away, I could hear things popping in the grass. Blue leaves crinkling to ash, and somewhere there were tiny screams. Tiny, bright screams. Something was burned alive in that field, and I don't want to think about what it might have been. It sounded human. Wrong, but human. Julie recovered in a couple of days. The doctors figured she'd been eating seeds from the sunflower and that it had contained some kind of poison. The doctor couldn't find anything abnormal about her blood levels, and after a couple of days of rest, she was back to her old self again. Her eyes were back to their ordinary brown, and her smile was as genuine as ever. She was so sorry for all the trouble she caused, and she had a hard time remembering what had happened. To her, it was all a bad dream. We've since gotten pregnant. Over the months, we've baby-proofed the apartment, but we're already looking to move to a house. Julie got back to her job as a temp, and she might be looking at an extension at the end of the school year. She's quite popular. We're thinking about the name Danny with a Y for a boy, or Danny with an I for a girl. We're not sure yet. There's only one thing that still worries me. The ultrasounds. Julie have been taking them while I'm at work, but she's shown me every single image. They look perfectly fine, but on the last one, there was something that didn't add up. In the corner of the picture, the date was set to 5 years ago. I'm suspecting she's not showing me the actual ultrasounds, or that she hasn't taken them. I don't know what she could be hiding, and sometimes, at night, I hear her humming. The same damn tune. You're my friend, I'll sing your tune. A setting sun to rising moon. I ask you, buddy Blue, won't you be a sunflower too?